A man would go on trial for the murder of a child, but was he really the killer? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Alexander Harris. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Alexander Harris was just 7 years old, and he lived with his mom in Mountain View, California. The family had gone to Las Vegas to celebrate Thanksgiving, and on their way back home to Mountain View, they would actually cross into Primm, Nevada, which then they made a pit stop at Whiskey Pete's Casino and Hotel. He was with his mom, Roxanne, and I believe it was also with his grandfather, her dad. At some point, Alex's mom brings him to the little arcade that's in the casino, and she kind of leaves him there on his own while she goes off and, I guess, does some gambling. He comes back to the arcade 20 minutes later. Her 7-year-old son, Alex, is gone, never to be seen alive again. After exhausting their own attempt at a search, they contacted police to report him missing. This is when the police would speak to several witnesses who think they saw a man potentially holding the hands of a little boy walking out of the casino. These witnesses would come up with this composite drawing of the man. But with those witnesses, they all could not agree on exactly how he looked like. And some of the witnesses said it looked like the boy was very willingly going with this man. It looked like this was a father and son. They did comb through all of their CCTV footage that they had, but back then it was not very clear. You know, this is 1987, and they had very grainy footage of potentially what the witnesses saw, but they really could not make it out. And so the camera footage was really useless. The only thing they really knew for sure was at this point, Alex was kidnapped. Someone stole him from that casino. Approximately 30 days later, he was found. Unfortunately, he was found deceased. His body would be located underneath a trailer, and this was at a trailer park being utilized by off-duty casino staff. When Alex was found, he was wearing the exact same clothes and shoes that he was last seen wearing, meaning he was either held captive for some time and never changed, or he was killed that very day. They determined that Alex had been suffocated to death. This was definitely a homicide. The only piece of potential evidence was a fingerprint found on the glasses that Alex wore. Outside of that, however, there really was no other physical evidence. There was no additional DNA, no hair, no boot or shoe impressions or tire tracks. There was no physical evidence found in the casino. The CCTV footage was completely unreliable. The witnesses were not in sync with their stories. And this man may or may not have been his kidnapper and killer. This guy might have just been there with his son. But they did have, I guess, 3 suspects. I guess they looked into 2 of them very thoroughly. They determined that their alibis were rock solid. They did not really look like the composite drawing. They did not, the witnesses would not identify them, or could not, I should say. So those 2 were cleared. Their 3rd suspect was this man here, a computer programmer from San Diego, California, named Howard Lee Haupt. Howard was staying at Whiskey Pete's during the time that Alex vanished. He did have a pretty similar appearance to the sketch that was made. However, all of the witnesses who saw this man, none of them could properly identify him in a lineup. There was no physical evidence against him. That fingerprint found on Alex's glasses wasn't his. However, police decided this is our guy, and so they arrested him and charged him with kidnapping and murder. Something else to also note is that he passed 2 different lie detector tests, but they could not be used in his trial. The trial went on for 5 weeks. The prosecution presented no physical evidence that tied him to the murder, presented no evidence that he had ever stepped foot on that trailer park. Witnesses who claimed to see him, none of them could agree that that was him. The only thing they had was that he was at that casino and hotel when Alex was kidnapped. But guess what? A lot of people were there. And so the jury would later say that there was no physical evidence, and the witnesses, none of them could agree, and they felt that the witnesses were all very unreliable. And so Howard was found not guilty of the kidnapping and murder. He would end up filing a $4 million lawsuit in 1990, alleging that the prosecution and the police involved violated his civil rights. He never should have even been arrested, let alone charged and got into trial. He ended up being awarded $1 million. And at the heart of this case, a 7-year-old boy was taken and murdered. Police just needed to find someone to pin this on, and they didn't even do that correctly. And now, all the way here in 2025, the murder of Alex Harris, it remains unsolved. She vanished 32 years ago. Will she ever be found? Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Amberly Cruickshank. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred near Lake Wakatipu, which is in New Zealand. At the time this case occurred, Amberly Cruickshank was just 2 years old. But everyone described her as very cheerful, very bubbly. She loved her brother. She was like his little shadow. She liked to help in the kitchen, and she was just super happy. But on October 17th, 1992, she vanished forever. On that particular day, they had gone to a friend's house. His name is Richard, and he lived just off of Lake Wakatipu. They were having like a barbecue there, and the family consisted of Amber, who was the second born child in the family, and her mom and her stepdad and her baby brother were all at the barbecue, and there was about 10 or 11 people there at that barbecue. At some point, the mom and the stepfather both thought that they were with Amberly. So when her mom couldn't find her, she just assumed that she was with the stepdad. When the stepdad couldn't find her, he assumed that she was with the mom. But the reality is Amber wasn't with any of them. Within 20 minutes or so of arriving at this house, Amber disappeared. Amber was last seen wearing clothing very similar to this outfit here. And after searching the area, the parents could not find her. The people at the barbecue could not find her. They would contact police. The fear is that Amber somehow had gotten herself or walked to the nearby lake and went inside, couldn't swim, and drowned. So one of the very first things they do is not only do they search the entire shorelines of the lake, because maybe there would be clothing or something, but they found no indications Amber was there. They then brought in divers. They used boats. They searched that entire lake. They searched it thoroughly. And at the end of it all, they did not find Amber. The police said that if Amber had gone into that lake, they would have found her, and they did not. Nobody in the area heard or saw anything occur. Nobody heard like the screams or cries of a 2-year-old. But there was also, quite a few people at the house barbecuing, and there was also people in other homes that were out there, barbecuing and just being loud and having fun. And so really anyone could have done something to her, and people probably would not have seen or heard it. After they realized that she wasn't in the lake, I guess they also searched like a railroad area that's right by the lake. And again, they found nothing. But they would determine at that point that Amberly Cruickshank did not fall into the lake accidentally, that something happened to her in terms of foul play. There was a theory that maybe she had wandered off into the street and she was hit by a car. The person, realizing he just hit a child, maybe took the child and buried her somewhere. Another theory is that she wandered off and was just kidnapped by a would-be assailant. And by the way, the mom and the stepdad have never been considered suspects. Both of them weren't necessarily perfect people, right? They had their own issues, but they could not find any reason for or any proof that they were involved in whatever happened to Amber. But they do believe that potentially someone at that house party, that barbecue, is responsible for killing Amber. In 2022, police there in New Zealand stated that they have a person of interest. That this man is described as someone who came from Kingston, and they discovered that this man was at the barbecue that day. He did not live in the house, but he was a friend of the home owner. This man, they realized, gave inconsistent information. So when he was initially interviewed at the very beginning of all of this, he claimed he had never seen Amberly Cruickshank at that barbecue. But then in a later interview, he said he saw her playing outside. And very specifically, playing with a dog outside by, I guess, this bus they drove there in. Well, you can't say you never saw her there and then say with specific details that you did see her there. They're not saying that man is, an actual suspect in terms of he is the guy, but it's just suspicious, and it's just a possibility. But as of right now, in 2025, whoever may have taken Amberly Cruickshank is still out there. And most importantly, Amber has not come home. They have not found her. They have found no trace of her. She was just 2 years old. And the likely scenario is that a monster stole her, did something horrific to her, and then killed her. And God only knows where she would be at this point. Someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what exactly happened to Amberly Cruickshank on that day in 1992. If you have any information on the unsolved case of Amberly Cruickshank, please contact the local authorities there in New Zealand. Help bring Amber home. Hello, true crimeers. This is another missing or murdered Indigenous woman case, and this is the case of Andrea White. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Andrea White was 22 years old, and I guess she was half Hoopa and half Yurok. She was also the mother to 4 children. Unfortunately, like with many Indigenous women cases, there's virtually no information about her. Her children were very young when this happened. Her kids, though, would describe her as a very outgoing, very beautiful woman, and, she was looking forward to the life ahead with her kids. And other people would describe her as being free like a bird. But unfortunately, her kids did not get to grow up with her. So it was July of 1991, and Andrea had a court date in Eureka, California. So she would leave her home in Hoopa and take the trip down to Eureka. I think it's believed that Andrea hitchhiked there because she did hitchhike often. I just don't know if she ever actually made it to her court appearance. And according to witnesses, they saw her near Blue Lake, California on July 31st, 1991. She was seen near the Blue Lake exit of Highway 299, and that is the last confirmed sighting of her. The witnesses who saw her said she got into, they described it as a green and white 4-door Chevy Impala, possibly a 1964 model with snow/mud tires. Andrea did not have her purse on her, but they don't know if she had or did not have any identification on her person. Again, I don't know if she made the court date. There doesn't seem to be any mention of that, but I believe you would have to show ID to attend a court date, so I'm not sure. At the time of this case, Andrea White was 5 feet tall, approximately 115 pounds. She has a 5-inch scar on the left side of her temple. She was last seen wearing a black leather jacket, a white, possibly sleeveless t-shirt, Levi's jeans, and possibly sneakers. She had been carrying a black and white duffel bag containing a purple skirt, a black sweater, black spandex tights with lace at the ankle, and black satin pumps. And again, she was 22 years old at the time in 1991. Andrea is a human being. She is just as much a human being as I am and as you are. Her story deserved to be told just as much as a non-Indigenous person's story is told. But like I said, unfortunately, that doesn't happen. But somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what happened to Andrea White. Perhaps that someone is you. If alive today, Andrea would be 56 years old, and there is always hope that she is still alive. But if you have any information, please call 707-445-7439. She is pointing to where her nephew's skull was found, and his murder remains unsolved. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Armani Moran. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time this case occurred, Armani Moran was 27 years old and he lived in Dallas, Texas. There's not a ton of personal information on him, but I was watching an interview with his aunt, and she said that he was the type of person that the second he entered a room, he was basically just dancing. He was just a really happy guy. Armani was a beautiful soul in and out, and he is dearly, dearly missed. I do want to mention something real quick. There is like an article or two about his case that actually tries to suggest that Armani was transgender. He was not. He did identify as a gay male, but he was not transgender. There was a particular news group who was trying to lump his case in with other cases about transgender people who had been killed kind of in the same area at the same time. But it did not accurately portray Armani. On May 22nd, 2017, Armani was assaulted by an individual. It sounds like police were notified of the assault, but I'm not 100% sure the details behind it. On May 30th, 2017, the individual who had assaulted him a week prior, they were making phone calls to Armani's home and harassing him, trying to lure him out of the house. On May 31st, 2017, someone literally fired a gun into Armani's home. Now, nobody was struck by the bullet. When Armani stepped outside the door, he was assaulted again. Apparently, this was captured on a doorbell camera and was given to police, but it doesn't sound like anything was done right then and there. Allegedly, one of the people who perpetrated this would basically boast about it on Facebook. 3 days later, on June 3rd, 2017, Armani was assaulted again. And then, later that day, Armani vanished. Nobody saw him alive ever again. He would be reported missing by his family. It doesn't sound like much really happened in the in-between, but on July 24th, 2017, this man here was walking down, I guess, a road, and his dog picked up a skull. It was a human skull, sort of out there in the open. And so obviously he rushes to call police right away. Police collect the skull, and they find a few more skeletal remains in this like woody area just outside where the skull was found. Eventually, all of the remains that they had they could say belonged to the same person, which they would then later confirm belonged to Armani Moran. His cause of death, however, could not be determined. There was a point where it sounds like police just wanted to say this was an accidental death, but that's insane. Given all of the assaults, the person shooting at his house, how they could possibly look at this and go, oh yeah, it was an accidental death or whatever. It's frustrating. But it is now, from what I understand, being looked at and treated as a homicide case. His aunt is pictured here. She is pointing to the area where the skull was found, and they just want justice for Armani. According to Solve the Case, one of the potential perpetrators is actually now deceased themselves. They were shot and killed. Then the other suspect is actually now currently in prison on unrelated assault charges. And then this third person has not been apprehended. I don't know their names, however. If you look up Armani Moran's case, or you try to, you're not going to find much information, which is unbelievable. There are virtually no, news articles written about it. I do see, the one news clip from NBC, really not much else. The family wants justice for Armani. They got him back, and they were able to cremate him, but now they want whoever was responsible to pay for it. I don't know where the police are at with this. I don't know how seriously they're investigating this. Given the very little coverage on it, I have to suspect that probably not much. But someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. You can always report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are. You just need to say what you know. Armani Moran was a human being. He was a victim of a homicide. He deserves justice. And if you can make that happen, then please do something. If you saw something, if you know something, you need to say something. If you have any information on the murder of Armani Moran, please call 214-671-3677.
Saying to pull the trigger, the killer's done. Love you.
Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Chardon High School shooting. Viewer discretion is advised. This is Chardon High School in Chardon, Ohio. It was the morning of February 27th, 2012. The school would typically open early before classes so that students can go in and have breakfast, which would prompt most of the students to end up kind of migrating to the cafeteria. When at approximately 7:30 a.m., someone who was sitting in the cafeteria just stands up, brandishes a gun, and begins to fire. There was surveillance cameras in the cafeteria, and it captured most of the incident. 3 male students, one named Russell King Jr., the other Demetrius Hewlin, and then Danny Parmador, they were shot along with 3 other students. Unfortunately, these 3 individuals would not survive their injuries. I know that they were rushed to the hospital, and I think 1 or 2 of them was alive for a couple of days, but they would end up passing. And then the 3 other individuals who were shot were also at the hospital for some time, but would end up surviving. The perpetrator was this kid, Thomas T.J. Lane. As he is shooting with his handgun that he brought to school, he shoots several people, and then a couple of teachers, Joseph Ricci and Frank Hall, they chased after TJ and chased him out of the school, putting their own lives at risk. And then an officer had arrived within a couple of minutes or so, and they found TJ by a car, and he was promptly arrested. Not before causing a massive amount of chaos. School shootings are obviously very common here, and this was just another tick on the tally board. He could have killed probably a lot more, and so thankfully he was not able to do that. I saw this image of, I guess, him being interrogated, and he was wearing a shirt or a sweater that says killer. He was smug. He was cocky. He admitted to doing it. He said he was the one, yeah. In terms of his actual motive, though, there was really just rumors and speculation that he may have had a rivalry with one of the victims. But apparently he got the gun, which was a .22 caliber handgun, from his uncle, or his uncle had purchased the gun. He didn't buy it for TJ, he just bought it, and then TJ took it and used it. which the gun was eventually put into evidence. By March 2nd, the funerals for the 3 victims were held, and the kids would go back to school. I can't imagine being in one of those situations and then having to go back to that same place after something so horrific happened, especially those who were shot and survived, or maybe some of these people who had bullets grazed past them. TJ had to go through competency hearings. He had to work with a psychologist to determine if he was basically sane or not. They did say he was mentally ill. He had psychosis and suffered hallucinations, but they also said that these issues did not interfere with what he did, meaning he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew what he was doing was illegal, and he knew he was killing people, and he still went through with it. On February 26, 2013, TJ Lane pled guilty to the murders. At his sentencing hearing, he removes his top shirt to reveal what he's wearing underneath. A shirt with the word killer written across it, and he constantly giving smug and asshole looks to the victims' families. He actually flipped off the victims' families, and then he said this to them. When they asked him if he had anything to say, this is what he said.
Saying pull the trigger, the killer's done. Love you.
In case you didn't hear it clearly, he said, quote, "This hand that pulled the trigger that killed your sons now to the memory. All of you." You ever want to just reach through your phone, tablet, computer, or television when you see things like this and just want to, you know what I mean? On September 11th, 2014, TJ Lane escaped prison with, I think, 1 or 2 other inmates. They made their own ladder to escape over the wall. By the following day, TJ Lane was found and put back into prison, as were the other 2 men. TJ Lane is now serving out 3 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. And despite him trying his best to disgrace the victims even more, these 3 victims got the justice they very rightfully deserved. It's a mystery that's puzzled Australia for 32 years. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Clare Morrison. Viewer discretion is advised. Clare grew up in Australia with a brother and a sister, and they were always very close. She was just always a happy kid. She was popular. Everyone loved her. But unfortunately, she only got 13 years on this earth because someone stole her from the world. So this case occurred in Geelong, Australia, and I'm so sorry if I said that wrong. I looked it up, so hopefully they weren't lying. On December 18th, 1992, Clare was last seen with her friends at the Geelong Mall. Apparently, Clare ended up leaving on her own while the other kids, I guess, went somewhere else together. There were a couple of witnesses who saw her walking away from the mall. Now, her destination, from what I understand, was she was going home to get some money for Christmas shopping, and then she was supposed to meet some of the friends at a McDonald's. But she was observed walking on Little Malip Street in the direction of Moorabool Street. Some people said it appeared that she was intoxicated, which of course it's not unusual for teenagers. But Clare never got to her home, and it wouldn't be long until they found out where she was. The following day, on the morning of December 19th, 1992, here at Bells Beach, a couple of surfers found a body. The body had washed up on shore. This victim had clearly been beaten. She had some sort of severe injuries to her neck and some to her head. She also had been bitten by sharks. And because the body was relatively mangled due to sharks, they weren't really able to determine exactly how she died. But she would be identified as 13-year-old Clare Morrison. And it really kind of started off as a puzzling case because she had separated from her friends for at least a short period on that, evening. Nobody else was with her that they are aware of. It was hard for them to know exactly what her, chain of events was. This was before cameras were everywhere. But there was a witness who stated that they saw Clare getting into a blue Holden Commodore with 2 unidentified men. And I think this is a description of one of those supposed alleged men. Now, this information was given to police by an 18-year-old acquaintance of Clare's, 18-year-old Shane McLaren. So police working on his tip were out there looking for this car. They were really focusing on this car, but they were never going to find it because they found out he lied. He gave a false report to police, and so he was actually arrested for that. But because of this, he then became their primary suspect. He would, I think, spend some time in jail for perjury, but he has always denied having anything to do with killing Claire. He said he was just a sort of on-again, off-again, occasional friend of hers. They would drink or smoke pot together. But here's the thing. It's been over 30 years now. He's never been charged. Nobody has been charged with connections to the murder of Clare Morrison. No one's really been arrested. No one's been named a genuine suspect. And I imagine it's probably pretty difficult because there's not going to be really any forensic evidence on her. One, because she was in the water at some point. A shark had mangled her body and clothing, and so that makes it really difficult. They are currently still offering a $50,000 reward for information that helps lead to the capture of her killer. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth. Perhaps that someone is you. You can report your information anonymously. If you have information, and this is going to be an Australian phone number, so you can call 1-800-333-000. Help her get justice. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Clarence Witty. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred here in Elgin, Oregon, and it occurred in 1986. 90-year-old Clarence Witty lived above a local hardware store in an apartment. Attached to that building was a restaurant owned by Michael Lawson and Kathleen Stockfleth. I can't find a photo of her, but it was called Odie's Steakhouse. At 12:30 a.m. on January 27th, 1986, 90-year-old Clarence was asleep in his room. All of a sudden, there was a very loud explosion coming from somewhere in the building or near it. The explosion would catch other buildings on fire. 90-year-old Clarence was really not able to move very fast, and the fire had spread to his apartment, and he was unable to escape because it happened all so quickly. Clarence Witty would die in the fire. It would very quickly be learned that Michael Lawson and Kathleen Stockfleth had deliberately set their steakhouse on fire or rigged it to explode. I believe it's for some sort of, insurance money thing. The two of them fled the area, but then were both pretty quickly captured. They were both arrested for arson and felony murder because Clarence died. Michael Lawson pled guilty to arson and manslaughter, as did Kathleen. For some reason, he is allowed to be out and about before his sentencing. And in that time, Michael Lawson fled. And according to their investigation, there were witnesses who saw him selling his vehicle in Portland and then never seen again. Then, in August of 1999, he was finally found. He was located in Baja California. He had came up with some, new name, and he was arrested there in Mexico, brought back to the States, where he would then be sentenced to 20 years in prison. I kind of feel like since this was like a deliberate act, maybe they didn't have the intention, obviously, to kill someone, but there's premeditation in the fact that they set this fire with the knowledge that it could harm people, or worse. I feel like 20 years is like a slap on the wrist. It just doesn't seem very fair. Did Clarence really get justice? I guess maybe a little bit. She went to the playground behind her house, but she has never come home. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Corrine Erstad. Viewer discretion is advised. Corrine Erstad lived here in this house with her family, located in Inver Grove Heights, Minnesota. Corrine was just 5 years old at the time of this case. Just a 5-year-old kid who loved playing. And on June 1st, 1992, she vanished into thin air. At approximately 7:30 p.m. on that June 1st, 1992 day, Corrine would walk out of her house to go to the little playground right behind their home. This was something she did all the time. This was not unusual. However, she had only been gone for about 5 minutes when her dad asked her brother to go get Corrine to come inside. When the little brother goes to the playground, he does not find his sister. Corrine is gone. So the brother goes back to the house to tell their mom and stepdad that Corrine's missing, and she is officially reported missing within 2 hours of the last time anyone saw her. When police looked at the playground, they confirmed that she was nowhere to be found. There was no trace of her anywhere, and there really weren't any witnesses who actually saw what may have happened to her. She was just gone. gone from a playground literally right outside of her house. Now, one witness would come forward, but this was like a little kid who thinks that at some point, maybe that night, he saw what a young girl who looks like Corrine talking to a man who had a dog. And the little girl was petting this man's dog. However, no one has been able to confirm if that was actually Corrine, and no one can confirm who this man with the dog was. Within days, this man here would become the primary suspect in whatever may have happened to Corrine. This was Robert Guevara. He was a friend of Corrine's parents. He actually stayed the night at their house all the time. He, in fact, was at their household on the evening in question. According to Corrine's mom, Corrine had told her mom that this guy here, Robert Guevara, touched her in an inappropriate way. And then later that same night, Corrine goes missing. But the mom didn't tell this story to police for like several days, even though she knew of what he did the day that Corrine disappeared. Corrine and her siblings lived in a kind of a troubled home. They bounced around a lot. Her parents, neither of them had a job, and the mom did have a history of drug abuse. And then I guess at some point in 1987 or so, Corrine and her siblings spent some time in foster care, but they were back in custody with their mom and stepdad. So the police obviously need to look into Robert Guevara. They end up going to his place of work and they search his work locker. In that locker, they actually find a pair of girls' underwear that had been stained with blood and also semen. They also found a dress that was identical to the dress that Corrine was last seen wearing. At the home where he normally lived, they found a blood-soaked shower curtain. A presumptive test on all of these items, by the way, stated that the red stains, the blood stains, were in fact human blood. DNA technology, however, was not anywhere close to where it is now. And so at the time, they're only working with like percentages. You know, there's a 1 in such and such odds of this matching Corrine or Robert. So there was no 100% match at that time. But he was arrested and charged with Corrine's murder, abduction, and rape, despite the fact that Corrine at that time was not found. And they did these humongous searches of volunteers, police, family, friends. Everyone was involved, but they could not find a single trace of Corrine. Robert Guevara's trial actually started with, at least from the defense side, of the mother being blamed. There were accusations that she tried to sell or did sell Corrine, just to make some money, or possibly to arrange some kind of ransom thing where she would end up getting that money. That was just the accusation. I don't think they actually had proof of any of it. Minnesota law at that time did not allow the DNA evidence at trial in terms of the DNA they had with this case. So what this says here is that Minnesota did not allow prosecutors to argue that statistically it was almost impossible for the DNA to have come from anyone else. They needed like 100% certainty. So that, coupled with the fact that Corrine's body had never been found, and now they really can't use the literal blood-soaked shower curtain, the underwear, the girl's dress, they can't use any of it. And so he was found not guilty. There were beliefs that the evidence that was found in his locker was planted because the locker was never actually locked, and that someone knew full well that Robert was becoming a suspect, and so they planted that evidence to make him look 100% guilty. They also didn't have proof, though, of that. But unfortunately, you need to be able to convict beyond a reasonable doubt. Without that DNA evidence being included, and with no body, there was just no choice, unfortunately, for the jury. That law, by the way, obviously has since changed. But Robert Guevara can no longer be charged with any potential murder, rape, or kidnapping when it comes to Corrine. Because he was acquitted, there's double jeopardy now in play. So if he murdered Corrine, he got away with it. Of course, there is always still that hope that maybe she is still out there alive. Maybe she was sold to someone, as horrible as that sounds. Again, no proof of that. But in the off chance that she is still alive, she may look something close to this. The likelihood is that she is deceased. The likelihood is that Robert Guevara killed her. But in the off chance that was not the case, and you know something, you need to call. You can reach the police at 651-450-2525. If there is any hope that there can be some kind of end result here, at least to bring Corrine home, even if that means they have to lay her to rest, please come forward and help this community. Hi, have a face, won't you? Do you know who has the scariest true crime voice, in my opinion? Me! No, just kidding. No, I'm not. I can't pull off the scary voice. But for me, it's the guy who does Criminally Listed. His voice terrifies me. And that's a good thing. I mean that as an absolute freaking compliment. He has like this silky, smooth kind of voice, right? Very calm, with like a tinge of Canada, right? But it's through like the monotonous tone of his voice, again, I mean as a compliment, that he just scares the shit out of me. He's probably the nicest, most gentle person on earth. But when I hear him talk in a video, I have to stop because I'm going to have nightmares. To me, kind of almost gives Robert Stack a little bit of run for his money. Because it's always like, when he walked into the house, when he walked into the house, there was blood everywhere. Sorry, I'm so sorry. It's always accompanied by like that really terrifying music that, I can't even do it. There was a note in blood on the wall, and it said, "You're next." It's either him or Chills. Number 15, criminally listed. No. Anyway, who's the scariest true crime voice for you guys? The video you see playing behind me would show one of the worst freak accidents. Viewer discretion is advised. This story occurred in a Denny's parking lot in January of 2023 in Louisville, Kentucky. This couple here had gone to the Denny's to celebrate the husband getting out of the hospital, and they were there with their adult daughter. The Denny's sign that we are all very familiar with, of course, weighs approximately 2,800 pounds. Well, once the couple and their daughter had gotten back into their car, something happens. The video that you are about to see is the moment where the sign fell off from the pole, but you do not see anything graphic, but just in case, educational purposes only, viewer discretion is advised. I'm not 100% sure where the recording came from, but what you saw was that 2,800 pound Denny sign falling from the pole. And just underneath the sign was a parked vehicle where the 3 family members were inside. The videos I'm about to show you is just from the aftermath, but there is no blood or anything like that, nothing graphic. But you can see how massive this sign is, lying on top of this car. And you can tell from the damage, it looks like it might have landed kind of straight up and then fell over onto the road. And it's pretty terrifying. Of the 3 people inside the vehicle, the matriarch of the family was crushed to death by the sign. The way it landed, it landed basically right on top of her, crushing her with the car. Their daughter, also in the car, was hospitalized for injuries. However, she would end up recovering, thankfully. The patriarch of the family was also rushed to the hospital, and he was alive for a few days, but unfortunately, he also would end up dying from his injuries. So in just a few seconds, this catastrophe destroyed almost an entire family. What they believe happened was that there was some severe wind at that time, and the wind just blew it off the pole. Was the sign installed properly? I'm not sure. I mean, this is the kind of thing that does not happen very often. This is literally the definition of a freak accident. But I don't really see many updates since January or early February of 2023, where they really just mention how the 2 people died from blunt force trauma. But I don't see any updates on if there was an investigation done into the sign and why this happened. Even with winds, it shouldn't have. I don't see anything about lawsuits or anything like that. A lot of that stuff could have been done privately without being released to the public, perhaps. But, you know, in the end, this is a horrible tragedy. This is something you could never, ever expect or anticipate to happen. I mean, if you're like in a strong tornado or hurricane type thing, sure, but just a regular day with high winds, no one would expect this kind of thing to occur. It's just one more horror that we have to look out for now. The family is still waiting for the answer to who killed David and Mina. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of David and Mina Swan. Viewer discretion is advised. 88-year-old David Swan and his 80-year-old wife, Mina Swan, they had been married for about 20 years. Each of them had children from their previous marriages. And so they kind of created this like blended family. They lived here in this home in Clearwater, Florida. David was a retired accountant and Mina was a retired teacher. And the 2 of them loved spending every moment with each other. They were always seen smiling and laughing together. They were just a really happy couple. A couple that nobody had any hatred for. They loved going on hikes together. They loved camping together. They loved just being outdoors together. They had an RV that they would drive around all over the place. One of his family members would say that, when the RV broke down in some random, city or town, that's what David liked the most, so he can spend more time in that area. He was an explorer. And so it just makes it so baffling why someone would do something so awful to a seemingly normal, happy couple who wronged nobody. But that is what happened. It was September 29th, 2018. David and Mina's families and friends and neighbors had not seen them or heard from them in several days, which was really unusual. The neighbors noticed that there were several newspapers stacked up near the door, and they always took in their newspapers, so something just felt wrong. And it was Mina's daughter, Noelle, that would enter the home and make the grisly discovery. Her mother, Mina, and her stepfather, David, had been shot to death, and so they called 911 immediately. When police do their initial investigation, they find that there is no forced entry to the home, no broken windows, no kicked-in doors, nothing appeared to have been stolen or rummaged through. You just had an elderly couple shot to death in their home. A couple who, through their investigation, realized they had no enemies. They couldn't find anyone even close that would match this. But they did feel that this was a planned murder, that David and Mina were specifically targeted, and the killer's goal was just to go into that home, shoot both of them, and leave. Nobody saw or heard anything, so it must have been just quick. But who would do that? Who would premeditate the murder of this elderly couple with no enemies? Well, they still don't know. So this is some of their adult children here. Kind of hidden behind the scenes of this horrible tragedy is now lawsuits. There is speculation, but it is so far unconfirmed, that the motive behind these murders may have been financial. That David and Mina, I guess, had each $1 million to their names, which there would also be a lot of inheritance money going out to family members. And so this is when lawsuits would kick in, where basically both sides of this family are suing each other with regards to this inheritance that hasn't been fully paid out yet. Is that the motive for this? I've seen it before in several cases, but that doesn't mean that's actually what it is. Based on how everyone described David and Mina, though, as to not having any enemies in the world, they hadn't been arguing with anyone. They're just a seemingly normal, happy couple who mind their own business. And the fact that this looked and seemed to be a targeted attack, you have to think that this is quite possibly, allegedly, maybe an inside job. But were David and Mina trustworthy people? I'm not sure. Would they have let a stranger into their home if they pretended that they needed help? It's possible, and that would explain why there's no forced entry. But then why shoot them both and not take anything? That's the other thing. Unless they did take something and police just aren't, releasing that information. I'm sure there are plenty of things they have to keep close to the chest so that they know they have their killer if that person slips up in some kind of interrogation. This is a case that I've been reading has really frustrated not only their family, but the Clearwater police. It's frustrating that they can't figure out who did this. They say they've collected somewhere around 300 to 500 pieces of evidence from the crime scenes, and I guess they've been trying to process those, but those take a really long time in terms of getting like fingerprints or DNA or anything like that. But I'm filming this at the end of March in 2025, and nothing's been announced that they have any suspects. They did say that there was, I guess, persons of interest that they had tracked down to Louisiana, but from that, I don't know what they've come up with. All I really know at this point is that the murder of David and Mina still is unsolved. They don't want to call it a cold case. They want to call it basically just an unsolved mystery, but somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what happened to David and Mina, or who did this and why. There are billboards up with the information. There is a $25,000 reward being offered. If you have any information on the murder of David and Mina Swan, please call either this number here or 727-444-7392. He is a killer in all likelihood, but who is he? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Delia Adriano. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred here in Oakville, which is in Ontario, Canada, and we're going back to 1982. 25-year-old Delia Adriano was working as a secretary, and she was engaged to be married. His name was Danny Dutra. It was September 26, 1982. Delia and her fiance were at a friend's house for a barbecue and watching a soccer match. Everything there went fine. They had a great time. Delia and Danny then got into the car where Danny brought her to her parents' home where she lived and dropped her off. This was sometime around 9:30 p.m., but Delia never made it inside. And soon, Delia would be reported missing. Shortly into the investigation, police got some information and tips about a car, and the witnesses described the car as a 1970s dark blue two-door Chevy Chevette, or something very similar with Ontario license plate. And I guess witnesses had seen this car parked in a driveway of a model home, which was just a couple houses down from Delia's parents' home. Well, the witnesses heard some sort of screaming match going on between a man and a woman, and then they actually saw the woman being forced into this car, and then they heard what sounded like an argument happening between the man and the woman in this car, and then the car drove away with the woman inside of it. It all happened very fast, but the witnesses would describe the woman, and when shown a photo of Delia, they said, yeah, that's definitely her. They also helped police come up with this composite drawing of the man behind the wheel. No one recognized him. He was not a familiar face to anyone who saw this. They put this image out on the news, but no one has really ever come forward to state that they know who it is. And first and foremost, they don't know where Delia is. Where is she? Unfortunately, they got their answers in November of 1982. It was a Sunday, November 7th, 1982. Delia's family got a knock at the door from the police to state, we found her. Delia was found deceased. Her body was in a pretty bad state of decomposition, and she was identified by dental records. Because of the state of her remains, unfortunately, they have either not determined her exact cause of death or have not released it. It sounds like the police there are kind of keeping a lot of this case's information close to the chest, which is a tactic used in order to, if you're going to be interviewing someone you think is the killer, they might say something that nobody else should know but the killer. But I do know that this is a homicide investigation. They also have not released if she had been sexually assaulted or not, or if they were even able to determine that. Delia's funeral, and Delia had come from a Portuguese family. Her funeral was attended by a massive amount of people. It was very clear that she was well loved. And I read an article that the priest who was running this funeral had basically said in Portuguese that the killer is likely amongst us right here, right now. And that was like a very haunting kind of message, but also it's potentially very true. Because over 1,000 people were there, there is a strong chance her killer was among them. But is this the killer? They don't know for sure. Was Delia kidnapped and thrown into this vehicle? They don't know for sure. All they know is that Delia was dropped off at her home. She never made it inside. She was then found murdered on November 7th, 1982. They looked into her fiance. They actually interviewed him several times. They got his alibi. They got all the physical evidence from him they could. And they have never really ever said that he was actually a suspect. It sounds like they've been able to completely clear him and rule him out. Now they're just left with whodunit. Somebody has to recognize this man. And now it's been decades. This guy is either deceased or very old. But it's very possible he is still out there roaming around, and maybe you were afraid of him to come forward because, maybe he threatened you or something. Well, now it's so much time has passed that you can say something now. You have to help this family get her justice, if that's still possible. Or at least, to the very least, get them answers. So, if you recognize this man and or know what happened to Delia, you are asked to please call 905-465-8736 or 1-800-222-8477. She was thrown away like garbage, and 30 years later, there are still no answers. Hello, true crimerers. This is another missing or murdered Indigenous woman case, and this is the case of Diane Dobson. Viewer discretion is advised. Diane Florence Dobson was a member of the Saugeen First Nation, and she lived in Ontario, Canada. At the time of this case, Diane was 36 years old, and she was the mother to 3 kids. She had a daughter and 2 sons. Diane herself was actually one of 10 kids. Growing up, she did not exactly have the easiest life. She was adopted, and then at one point when she was a teenager, she ran away from home. And unfortunately, she fell into the world of, drugs and alcohol. But when this case occurred, and this had been like for a few years now, she had been rebuilding her life. She was trying to give herself a better life as well as a better life for her kids. She was a great mom. She started taking courses in college. Her kids would say that Diane was more like a sister than she was a mom. That's just how close she was with her kids. They said she had a very youthful spirit, but unfortunately, someone would brutally take her life. Diane went missing on February 14th, 1995, Valentine's Day. The following day, on February 15th, a body was found in a ditch. The body was that of a woman, and she was bruised all over, and it was more than obvious that she had been beaten very severely. Most of the trauma she suffered came to her head. Her head was basically bashed in. Her face was non-existent. They believe that someone either bashed her head into the pavement or maybe used something like a lead pipe to beat her. And then they just threw her into a ditch like she was just trash. And then they went about their day. Whoever did this. The body would very soon be identified as belonging to 36-year-old Diane Dobson. There were no indications that she had been sexually assaulted. The police believe that Diane was likely murdered elsewhere and then was just thrown into this ditch. They also have stated that there was no obvious signs of defense on her body, and so it appeared that Diane had probably been attacked from behind or just something she was not expecting or did not see coming. So police would learn that Diane was last seen alive sometime around 5:45 p.m. on February 14th, and she was at a Wendy's, a restaurant. And then she was seen hitchhiking on Huron Church Road. Diane was found with no shoes on, but other than that, she was clothed. Police have to believe that since she was at like a popular restaurant and someone had to have seen something happen, was she abducted from the area of the restaurant, killed somewhere else, and then dumped? It sounds like police have some suspects, but there just isn't enough evidence to arrest anyone, and they haven't released any names publicly. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information, please call 519-255-6700. Help Diane and her family get the justice she rightfully deserves. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Gerald Lapierre. Viewer discretion is advised. So this case occurred in Quebec, in Canada, specifically in the Saint-Geneviève area. It's like a small little area from what I understand. And this case occurred all the way back in 1980, but unfortunately there is virtually no information about it. On January 16th, 1980, it was very, very cold. There were a couple of police officers who were just patrolling in a certain area when they found a horrific sight. They found a body. The interesting thing, I don't know exactly in what context, but it said that his body was, well, first of all, fully clothed, but he was, they said, completely frozen. Like, I don't know if that meant like solid, like a block of ice type of frozen, or what, but that's how he was found. And he was found with multiple gunshot wounds. There was no gun found with the remains. And that is it. That's all the information that's out there. It's always so sad, like cases like this. Like, this is a human being. This was a person, someone's family member, someone's friend. And no one seems to have any mention of his murder. He had apparently last been seen at a place called Baracus, and a waitress there was the last person to see him alive. But they confirmed, I guess, that he left that bar and then somehow ended up shot to death and then later frozen. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what happened to Gerald Lapierre. You can report information anonymously. So if you have any information on his murder in Canada, you can call 1-800-659-4264, and his case number is 179-800-116-002. Hello, true crimeers. This is the bizarre case of Henry McCabe. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Henry McCabe was 32 years old. He was married, and they had 2 children together. Henry himself was actually an immigrant from Liberia, but when this case happens, he's living in the United States, and he's specifically living in Mounds View, Minnesota, and he was working as a tax auditor. Henry was described as an absolutely devoted husband and father. He was dedicated to his family. And in 2015, Henry McCabe, through unfortunate reasons, became a viral sensation. It was September 6, 2015. Henry and a few of his friends had gone to a local nightclub. They were just there celebrating Labor Day. They were just hanging out, talking, drinking some beer. Nothing unusual. Then, according to one of Henry's friends, the friend would drive Henry from the nightclub to this gas station, and he dropped him off there. Later, CCTV footage would confirm this, and then the friend had taken off. This would be the last time that anybody saw Henry alive. Shortly after this, Henry's wife would receive, I guess, numerous phone calls and one of the most disturbing voicemails a person could possibly get. What you are about to hear is a snippet of a nearly 2-minute long voicemail that Henry left for his wife. Just a heads up, this may be disturbing to some of you. It is without question one of the most disturbing things I've ever heard. Most of it, you can't even understand what he's saying. There have been people who have tried to kind of decipher it or come up with some kind of transcript, but it doesn't sound like anyone's really ever kind of been able to figure it out. Clearly, this was a man who was in distress. There was screaming, there was yelling, terrified screams is what it sounds like. A whole bunch of unintelligible sounds and noises, and there is at points you hear like a growl and then a roar. The call then just suddenly drops, and that's it. That is the last time anyone would ever hear Henry ever again. He would be reported missing very quickly, and they of course did their search. The Mounds View police were trying to see if they could figure out some way of knowing what was being said on that voicemail, but it doesn't sound like they really got anywhere with that. To some people, it sounds like he's running from something or someone. He definitely sounds like he is in some sort of panic, or he's very stressed. He sounds terrified. That's just what my ears are hearing. Those are not the normal sounds you hear coming from someone. And so when you hear it, it's just so disturbing. And when the police released this audio to the public, it basically went viral. Does that disturbing voicemail have anything to do with what happened to him? On November 2nd, 2015, some answers would finally come. So this is Rush Lake in New Brighton, Minnesota, about 6 miles from the gas station where Henry was last confirmed to be alive. A few kayakers found a body floating in the water. The body would soon be identified as the missing husband and father, Henry McCabe, and the results of his autopsy would make for more uncertainty. There were no obvious signs of foul play on his body, meaning there were no bruises or blunt force trauma injuries, no gunshots, no stab wounds. There were no defense wounds on his body, no cuts, no scrapes. The toxicology report would show that he did have alcohol in his system, but that's not a surprise because he was at a bar that night. They just don't know if it had anything to do with what caused him to die. Ultimately, they said that his cause of death was drowning. It is very possible that he was, drunk enough and disoriented enough that he found his way by that lake and just fell in and drowned. But that's a 6-mile gap between where he was last seen to where he was eventually found. And it's in the middle of the night, so it's kind of like, how did he do that? And it doesn't explain the absolutely bonkers, disturbing voicemail. Now, even though there were no signs of foul play, that doesn't mean that foul play wasn't involved. Someone could have forced him into that lake and drowned him without leaving any kind of injuries or wounds, especially if he was inebriated. It might have been easier for them. Other people speculate that the sounds that you hear in that are possibly some sort of wild animal, like a bear. But that's also really just not possible, because if he was attacked by an animal, there would be obvious signs that he was attacked by an animal, but everything was in pristine condition. And then, of course, because, the internet is the internet, a lot of people speculate that something paranormal was at play here, which, could explain those gut-wrenching, horrible sounds. But that also would require you to believe in that sort of thing. And essentially here at the end, you were still left at a mystery. How did Henry get from that gas station 6 miles away to that lake in the middle of the night? Why did he leave that voicemail? Did he know he was doing that? What on earth was going on in that voicemail? Was there somebody else out there with him that nobody saw? Maybe he didn't see him. Maybe this person stalked him and drowned him in the lake without leaving any bruises or injuries. The story of Henry McCabe, this loving father and husband, has ultimately become one of the most baffling mysteries of recent times. I'm even reading a quote from a police officer involved in this. They said, "I don't believe the idea that he just wandered that far on his own, and the audio doesn't support the idea that his death is not suspicious." So even some of the police are saying that audio sounds like foul play. Sounds like something was happening to him. And so here at the end, the death of Henry McCabe remains one of the most bizarre unsolved mysteries of recent years. One of the most disturbing cases you'll hear. Was it an accident? Was it murder? Was it a ghost? What led to Henry McCabe's death? If you have any information about the mysterious death of Henry McCabe, please call 763-717-4070. This is the first disaster ever captured on film. This is the story of the HMS Albion. Viewer discretion is advised. This is an old-timey disaster as well. Maybe I should talk like this the entire time. It was June 21st, 1898. The HMS Albion was scheduled for its maiden voyage. And this voice is hurting my throat, so I'm gonna stop now. This was at the Thames Iron Works and Shipbuilding Company at Blackwall. They christened the ship and were set to launch it from the ramp. And then disaster struck. So at this launch, there were two people there who were actually filming with their state-of-the-art motion picture cameras. Now, it does not actually capture the physical disaster because it's just off of frame. But what happens is when the ship goes into the water, it creates a massive wave, or a wave big enough to topple over. They had built this thing like out of wood. It was like a structure for people to stand on and watch this going on. There were a bunch of, there were like thousands of people here to watch this. It was called a viewing stage, and unfortunately it was not very secure. So the wave of the ship going into the water basically toppled that entire thing down. And in a moment here, right here, you can see the people in those little boats. Those are people that are actually out there trying to save people who are now drowning. There were a lot of kids on this viewing structure that got swept into the water. The youngest victim was 3 months old. The oldest victim was 64 years old. 38 people who went into the water that day would never come out alive. 12 of the 38 victims were under the age of 18. Including the 3-month-old baby. And honestly, this is just kind of remarkable that there were people there even recording things. You know, nowadays, obviously, everyone's recording with their cell phones, but this was in 1898, more than a decade before the Titanic sank. And obviously, they have retouched the film to give it its color. It's originally in black and white. And so this is essentially an artist's rendering of the disaster that happened. So you can see this very large structure, and the wave crashed into it, causing part of it to break. And of course, you know, you had this big commotion. Now you have this massive ship basically going right over these people. It had to be absolutely horrifying for them. Honestly, it's kind of remarkable that there weren't more than 38 deaths. But yeah, I never heard of this before. This was a pretty crazy one. This was the before, this was the after. What happened to Joey? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Joey Offutt. Viewer discretion is advised. Joey Offutt lived in the quiet little community of Sykesville, which is in Pennsylvania. She was a mom to 3 daughters, including her newest, her 6-week-old baby. And this is Alexis, who is the father of the 6-week-old baby. He and Joey were engaged. Joey was described as a mom first and foremost. She absolutely adored her children. Her children were her entire universe, and she was a great mom. She was a happy person, well-liked by everyone, and she was just like one of those people that you would feel comfortable being around. But on one very mysterious day, all hell broke loose. It was July 12th, 2007. This very quiet and peaceful little neighborhood was shocked by the loud sound of an explosion. The house that Joey Offutt was living in with her kids had blown up, and the house was almost completely on fire. Firemen promptly arrived and they were able to put out the fire after a brief time. It was later discovered that the fire was started by an accelerant, so this was in fact an arson. And unfortunately, in the home, they found one body. The 6-week-old baby was found in the bathtub. The autopsy would show that he was actually deceased prior to the fire. They just could not determine how he died because of the state of his body. And his mom, Joey, nowhere to be found. Her 2 daughters were with other relatives and have remained in the care of Joey's relatives ever since. The last time anyone can recall actually physically seeing Joey was on July 4th, 2007. But the house explosion was on July 12th. So what happened in the interim? Where was she and where is she now? Allegedly, her car, which is this exact one, neighbors had reported seeing that car parked out in front of the house up until the point where the house had exploded. Well, 3 days later, her vehicle is found, and it's found in an apartment complex that Joey used to live in. The other thing that was noticeable to everyone in Joey's life is that the car was backed into the spot. They would basically say, Joey was not exactly a great driver, and parking was not her strong suit. Everyone agreed with that. The idea that she would back into a spot like this and do a perfect job was just not her. I don't blame you. I can't either. I've never been able to do it. But why was it abandoned there? That's just super strange. Now, at the house, there was a lot of the house that had not been damaged, but they did find her purse inside the home with her wallet and everything. As a matter of fact, most of her belongings were there. Most people believe that Joey did not leave that house on her own free will, that she was forced out of that house. But the problem is, who? The fiance and the father of the baby, Alexis, has not really ever been labeled a suspect. He was the father of this 6-week-old baby, and he absolutely loved that baby. And he and Joey were apparently had like a kind of a rocky relationship. Nothing super bad or anything, but nothing that would say, oh yeah, he definitely wanted to kill Joey and the baby. I think that's just sort of like the easy person you want to accuse, but it's not always the boyfriend, the husband, or the fiance. It doesn't sound like he had anything to do with this. So what happened when the house was blown up? Was Joey in there when that happened? No one knows. How did the baby die, and why kill the baby before you even set the fire? And where the hell is Joey? There were, at first the police and even the media would be like, well, she's nowhere to be found. Her car is found parked at an apartment complex she used to live in. It's got to be her. She did something and now she's a fugitive. Well, it's not really believed by the authorities that she is a fugitive. It truly sounds like they believe that she also met with foul play that day. Or maybe sooner. They don't really know. I mean, baby could have been killed days before the fire. She could have been taken away, kidnapped, and killed days before the fire. And they could have just gone back to the house to blow it up. There's a lot of unknowns with this. So Joey herself is not really considered a suspect because not one person has any sightings of her. She has not used any of her money. She has not used her social security number. She's gone. But where? You have a mother who is missing and a 6-week-old baby who is gone forever. What kind of monster does that to a baby and then also kidnaps this mother who has 2 other kids to care for that she loves and did God knows what to her? Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you saw something, if you know something, you have got to say something. If you have any information, please call 814-371-4652. You can also call the PSP Tips toll-free at 1-800-4PA-TIPS. Please help Joey and her baby get the justice they rightfully deserve. Hello, true crimerers. This is the 1-minute-ish case of John Pezzenti. Reviewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in the Bear Valley area of Alaska. That is where 55-year-old photographer John Pezzenti Jr. lived, and he had moved there in 1979. He would eventually find work as an independent wildlife photographer, something he absolutely had a passion for. He actually had photos published in magazines like National Geographic. He lived in the 15,000 block of Francesca Drive in Bear Valley, and on December 3rd, 2007, John was found murdered inside of his home. Police did not immediately reveal exactly what killed him, but they just said it was a homicide, although later it would be found out that John had been shot multiple times. However, nothing was stolen, no forced entry, so police have not figured out exactly why this happened, and most importantly, they don't know who did it. This case aired on America's Most Wanted twice, but still no arrests have ever been made. Someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of John Pezzenti, please call 907-786-8900. Her killers were prosecuted, convicted, and finally released before her identity was ever known. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Judy Rodriguez. Viewer discretion is advised. The story starts on August 25th, 1991, in a grassy area at the intersection of Cross Island and Southern State Parkways in southeast Queens. A body was discovered underneath a piece of wood. It was the body of a female. The body had been badly decomposed. There was no ID with the body, but she was bound, and they know that this was a homicide. This is kind of the unbelievable part, because I cannot find a single name of one of the 4 men who did this. I can't find their names anywhere. But 4 men were apprehended for committing this murder. These 4 men were between the ages of 18 and 20. They would be arrested and charged in September of 1991. One pled guilty to manslaughter in 1992 and received an 8 to 25-year sentence. He was released in 2009. 2 others pleaded guilty in October of 1992 to reckless endangerment in the first degree, and they received a sentence of 2 1/3 years to 7 years in prison. Both of them were released by 1996. The 4th individual pleaded guilty in February of 1993 to hindering prosecution and received a sentence of 1.5 to 4.5 years in prison. He was released in 1996. So these 4 men were convicted in some way, shape, or form with their connections to killing this victim. They were sentenced, they served their time, and were released. But meanwhile, the victim still not identified. The identity would not come until 2024. Luckily, the police kept all of the bones of this victim. They were able to extract DNA from the bones, and then they would plug that profile into nationwide databases, and specifically into the places like, Ancestry.com, that kind of thing. And that's when they finally got a hit. The victim, their Jane Doe from 1991, was 30-year-old Judy Rodriguez. She was the oldest of 4 children in her family, and herself had 3 kids. Judy was reported missing in January of 1991. She was last seen by her family on January 23rd. As a matter of fact, this right here is the last known photograph of Judy holding her 1-year-old daughter, because this was her 1-year-old daughter's birthday party. It was a big celebration. Everything went great. They just had no idea that that was the last time they would ever see Judy ever again. So the police had said that these 4 men had come across Judy just by chance. They approached her and either forcibly got her into their vehicle or she agreed to get into it. But soon after getting in the vehicle, she was tied up. They then drove to the intersection where later her body was found. They stopped the car, and then a couple of the men pushed Judy out of the car, and then Judy was struck over the head with a metal flashlight. This hit was so hard that it caused severe blunt force trauma to her skull, which would then lead to her death. They then hid Judy's body, but would come back 2 weeks later to move her a little bit further away and put those boards over her body. But eventually her remains would be discovered. I don't know why they didn't connect this, victim, this murder victim, to a missing person like Judy, especially since she disappeared in Queens and her body was found in Queens. So I don't know why there wasn't the connection, but the family, at least, it took a really long time, but at least they finally found out where Judy was. Judy's family, by the way, ended up raising her daughter, who never really got much time with her mom. What was the motive and the reason behind the murder? I'm not 100% sure. It could have been sexual assault, but there would be really no way of knowing that because she had been so badly decomposed, there wasn't much evidence of it. How they captured the 4 men, again, I'm not sure. It's really strange that I cannot find their names, their photos, or anything. They were all adults when this happened, so it's not like they were children. They're protecting their identities. But it's crazy that she was killed. Her family had been looking for her for, all this time, and they had no idea that she was deceased, and they had no idea that her 4 killers were arrested, they were charged, they were convicted, they were sentenced, they served their time, and then were released. All of that happening before they ever knew where she was. So they didn't really even get the satisfaction of getting justice. They only learned about it after the fact. And really, that's not even justice at all. They were all released within, years for killing her. I swear, our justice system is just so freaking frustrating. Usually I would say Judy Rodriguez got the justice she rightfully deserved, but did she? Did she really? Just 12 hours into her Cancun vacation, she was murdered. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Kiara Agnew. Viewer discretion is advised. 23-year-old Kiara Agnew was originally from the little area of Dawson Creek, which is in British Columbia, Canada. When this case occurred, she is a short time away from her 24th birthday, but unfortunately that would never come for her. Kiara was described as an incredibly hard-working, driven young woman. She was courageous, she was kind, and loving to everyone. One person would say that Kiara left an impact on you if she met you. That she had a heart of gold. Kiara loved traveling, she loved being outdoors, and she had been looking forward to this vacation for a while. She would be departing from British Columbia and going down to Cancun, or the Cancun area. She and her boyfriend Ryan were going to be going to the Playa del Carmen area, where they would book a stay at a resort there. She said goodbye to her family, she would be back soon, but that never happened. Just 12 hours into her trip, 12 hours after arriving there, she would be dead. It was March 3rd, 2023. In the laundry facility that was at this resort, the badly beaten body to 23-year-old Kiara Agnew was found. Lying next to her was her boyfriend Ryan. He was alive, but apparently he was sleeping. Kiara met with a really violent end, something she did not deserve. Boyfriend Ryan was arrested there in Mexico, and he was charged with killing her. Specifically, they charged him with femicide, which in Mexico defined as the killing of a woman for reasons of gender. That was made into law there in 2010. This was due to a very, increase in violence towards women there. So I have seen the photos of her past abuse by Ryan. I obviously can't show them those photos here on TikTok. Someone close to the case had sent me the photos just so I had an understanding. She had been abused by Ryan in the past. She even documented the abuse in her journal. I'll read this whole thing, but if you want to pause and read, you can. Ryan had gotten angry with her. He choked her, slammed her head into a wood bed frame, and he did this several times. He slapped her hard several times. He left her bruised. Flashing forward to her murder, she had been beaten about her head, trauma to her brain, bruises, indicative of someone beating her to death. These are the photos of Ryan's hands that were taken by police in the immediate aftermath of the body being found. And this is cut and dry. Kiara suffered physical abuse at the hand of her abusive boyfriend. I have told far too many stories like this before. And again, I will remind you every time, it is not a simple, I can get out of this whenever I want to type thing. Typically, the victims in this scenario are terrified of trying to leave. They want to come up with some reasons or excuse to stay with their abuser because they're afraid of them, afraid for their lives. And so it's not just a simple, oh, he hit me, I'm going to leave now and never come back. It sounds like based on her journal entries, she really wanted to kind of believe in Ryan. And she planned this trip. He went with her. She was really looking forward to it. But it ended in a very violent, sad way. Ryan goes on trial in Mexico. And by all accounts, it seems that there was some obvious corruption going on. His family had paid a lot of money towards all of this. And in the end, he goes on trial. And Ryan would be found not guilty. So apparently something that was presented at the trial, his defense attorneys would claim that the injuries on his hand did not match the injuries on Kiara's body, which I've never heard of that before. And apparently something else that was brought forward at the trial was, quote, also it was said that because of the brutality of her murder and what she went through in her last moments, that they determined that it was more than one person that did this to her, end quote. Kiara's attack was carried out by 2 or more people because she was badly beaten, and the suspect has no serious injuries. And in the genetics test, the genetic profiles of several people appear, including the suspects. I'm assuming that means DNA. Despite the proof, the actual written proof that she had been abused before, the photos of her actual abuse, again, they are out there, that she is bruised. Despite him literally sleeping next to her deceased body, I don't get it. I don't see how he could have been possibly found not guilty, other than the alleged suspicion that there is corruption going on. And it's kind of like, let's pay us and we'll take care of it kind of thing. Now family and friends are protesting and they're still trying to find some kind of justice for Kiara. Someone killed her. More than likely it's the boyfriend. Allegedly, of course, he was found not guilty. I have to say that. My question is I don't know how this works. Like, because both Kiara and the boyfriend were Canadian citizens. They were visiting Cancun. My question, I guess, is since they were both Canadian citizens, is there any possible chance of a criminal trial in Canada? I don't know. But I think the family wants to spread awareness about this case to see if someone or anyone will do anything. Because she was murdered. That part is clear. And she, to this day, has not received any justice. And she deserves that. So hopefully by, me making this video and hopefully other people making videos about this case, maybe the right set of eyes will see it and do something. Kiara is on this unfortunate long list of women who have been abused by men and who was not easy to escape these men. Ultimately, it led to her brutal end. That's not fair and that's not right. Someone needs to pay for what happened to her. And so hopefully, one day soon, Kiara and her family gets the justice for her that she very rightfully deserves. The photo you are seeing is the last known image of a man who vanished into the night. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Kyle Fleischmann. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Kyle Fleischmann was a 24-year-old who was living in the Charlotte, North Carolina area. Kyle was a college graduate. He was very well educated, incredibly intelligent. He came from a good family, well respected. Kyle never got himself into any kind of serious trouble. He had a lot of friends, he was popular, and everyone just loved him. This is him on the corner. But one day, he was at a bar, and then he disappeared. It was a late and very chilly November night in Charlotte. On the evening of November 8th, 2007, Kyle would go to a bar, this one here. It was the Buckhead Saloon. They had a wonderful little time. The evening was winding down, and Kyle was looking to get home. Now, this here is an image of Kyle at the bar, and his evening was winding down. There is another image captured of him on his cell phone. He is contacting friends and family to see if anyone can give him a ride home. At that point, I think he had separated from his friends that he went out with. But when all of his calls would go to voicemail, because at this point it's now into the morning of November 9th, and it was somewhere a little after 2 o'clock in the morning, so everyone was asleep. Kyle is then seen leaving the bar on his own, and then this right here is CCTV footage of him walking down the street. He was walking on College Street towards 6th Street, and it was near a place called Fuel Pizza. And this was it. This was the last known image of Kyle. Kyle Fleischmann has not been seen since this image right here. And nobody knows what happened to him. There's no stories of him getting into any kind of fights or arguments that night. He wasn't, completely out of his mind drunk. Nothing stood out to anyone in terms of thinking foul play might have been involved. He was just trying to get home safely, but he never did. So a missing persons report was filed for him, and the investigation started, and they began looking everywhere for him, but could not find him. They questioned friends, they questioned people at the bar, and they got nowhere closer to knowing what happened to him. Now, around that same time, I guess just down the road, there was this big empty field, this lot. Construction was starting right here on a new condo development. But at the time Kyle vanished, it was just pure emptiness. Days after he disappeared, apparently people would say they smelled something really bad coming from this area. But nothing really ever came of it. They did bring in investigators to search. They brought in scent dogs, and I guess it just did not pick up on anything. Many, many years go by, and now it's the Edgeline condos. There was someone who called police to state she had smelled something really horrific in that condo building somewhere. But they were never able to link it or trace it to a specific spot. But the woman who called in said it smelled like someone died. So is it possible that Kyle met with foul play and was buried somewhere on that lot? Maybe by someone who was working on that lot. Being at 2 o'clock in the morning, I don't imagine anyone was actually working there, but the belief is that he probably came across someone who tried to rob him, and it went wrong, and he was killed for it, and then dumped somewhere, possibly where those condos are now. But they don't know for sure. Kyle left behind his wallet and his coat there at the bar, and never came to retrieve them. I don't know with regards to where his cell phone is. I'm not sure if it was left behind as well, or if it was with him, but they haven't been able to find him through the cell phone. His parents just want him home. They just want to be able to bury him if he is gone. But, maybe he is alive out there somewhere. You never know. You got to keep hope alive. But it's been 18 years, and there's been no sightings of him. That's unusual. Nowadays, it's much harder to make yourself stay disappeared without anybody knowing or seeing you and going, oh my God, you were so-and-so. And that kind of brings it back to foul play. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth about what happened to Kyle Fleischmann. Perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the whereabouts or what may have happened to Kyle that night, please call 704-334-1600. Are there people who actually think Scott Peterson is innocent? Like, really? How? Why? When? Who? Who, what, when, where, why? All the questions. So admittedly, even though obviously I'm a true crime person, I actually did not know much about the Laci Peterson case. It was just one of those big named cases that I just never really looked into. So I just watched the Netflix docuseries. It's 3 episodes long. It's called American Murder, Laci Peterson. Then I read a couple articles and stuff. And again, are there actually people who truly believe that Scott Peterson did not kill Laci and their unborn child? Because what? So Laci and Scott Peterson, they live in the Modesto, California area, and it was, I think, on Christmas Eve that she went to allegedly go take her dog for a walk and then never came home, but the dog did on its leash. Scott had told people he was golfing that day, but then also told other people he went out on his boat that day. A boat he had just purchased very recently. Eventually, he notifies, people that Laci seems to be missing, and then it starts this whole big investigation, which becomes a nationwide story. And to me, it's just so obvious that he's the one. I mean, he was convicted. He was initially sentenced to death, but they don't do the death penalty in California anymore, so he's just there for life in prison. Recently, I know that courts granted him permission to test things for DNA, which I don't think that's actually been done yet. But it's so clear. It's just so, how are people thinking that he is innocent? They interviewed a couple people that were on the jury for this docuseries, and one of the guys said, yeah, Scott Peterson was having an affair with this, this woman. But I don't even care about the affair. It's not important. It's not relevant to this case. What the fuck? It is the entire case. 2 things, 2 motives. Scott Peterson was having an affair with a woman who had absolutely no idea that he was married. He told that woman, weeks before Laci actually disappeared, that he had recently lost his wife. At that point, though, Laci was still alive. And they have conversations between Scott and this other woman they obtained through their investigation. Him saying how much he loves this woman, he wants to be with her. And the other thing is that he did not want to have kids. He told, I guess, Laci that time and time again, he did not want to be a father. He had no interest in her getting pregnant. But then she does, and then literally a month before she's due-ish, she goes missing. And then about 4 or so months after she goes missing, 2 bodies are found. One, the body of Laci Peterson, and then the second body was their unborn child, Connor, which there's debate about how they got separated, that he could have been expelled from her body after decomposition. Some believe the baby was actually born and Scott also killed the baby directly. But they also find these bodies in a body of water where Scott Peterson took his boat out the day that Laci went missing, and this was 90 miles away from where they lived, and he wasn't golfing at all that day. They have receipts of all the purchases he made, he bought the boat a month or so in advance. He bought a bunch of stuff that he said he was going to be using for fishing, but none of those things were opened. They were all still in their packages. Almost like he was trying to set up some sort of alibi. See, I went fishing. Here's all my stuff. Oops, forgot to open any of it. And then Scott's family was interviewed, some of them throughout this docuseries, and I'm sorry, but they drove me nuts. I get it. You don't want to think your loved one is capable of doing something so horrific. You don't want to believe it. I understand. But it was just the way they were talking. It's this is an injustice towards Scott. He is innocent. He didn't do this. It's one thing to just kind of be in shock and just not want to believe it. To also, on the other side, going, he didn't do this. It wasn't him. He's not capable of doing this. Yeah, most murderers, their families would say, yeah, there's no way they're capable of doing that. They lived a quiet, peaceful life. They were a good person to everyone. Hello? That's every murderer ever, almost. They also try to say, he had a lack of emotion, during all of this. But I'm always that doesn't mean anything, because everyone reacts differently to trauma and to things like this. You don't know how you're going to act until it actually happens. And again, everyone is different. So that part didn't really, give any red flags to me personally. But, you know, the purchasing of the boat shows premeditation. The woman he was having an affair with, that he clearly wanted to be with her instead of Lacey because, you know, he didn't want to be a father. There was no signs of forced entry in the home. There was no sign of a crime scene in the house. No blood, no hair, nothing. Like, meaning no one broke into the house and kidnapped her and killed her or anything. There was literally nobody else who came up on their radar as to who could have done this. The only person in her life, because she had a pretty sheltered life, I guess. She didn't really get out much. She had a very, like, a tight circle of people. And there was just nobody else. There was no one. So if she goes missing along with her unborn child and then later is found murdered, really the only person that it makes sense that did it is the husband. They didn't have, like, physical evidence to, like, connect him, you know, scientifically to her remains. But they had the testimony of his lover, which was damning evidence. But anyway, I think he is way guilty. I don't see how anyone, it's him. I don't see how people can go, oh no, he's definitely innocent. Anyway, have you guys seen the docuseries? Am I crazy? What do you guys think? Am I way wrong? Let me know. Her murderer would also be murdered himself. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Lee Rotatori. Viewer discretion is advised. Lee Rotatori was born in September of 1949 in Fargo, North Dakota. And I know she had at least a couple of siblings, one sister and a brother. And her siblings would describe Lee as being just a really happy, very outgoing person. She was incredibly artistic. Lee was very popular. She had a big circle of friends. She loved horses. She would eventually own her own horse. And at one point, she was actually on a junior rifle club where she would compete. In 1978, she would end up marrying a man named Jerry Nemke, and that was in Wisconsin. But by the following year, 1979, they divorced. A couple of years go by. In 1981, they are now remarried. From what I understand, Jerry Nemke was actually previously convicted of a murder, in which he was sentenced to death for. That was back in 1960. But I guess about 2 years into his case, his entire conviction was overturned. And then, you know, he was obviously free. Lee would end up getting a job as a food service coordinator here at the Edmondson Hospital, and that was in Council Bluffs, Iowa. Now, Lee went there about a week before her husband and their son was going to be going. Lee was staying here at the Best Western until they can get their actual living situation figured out. And one day, the 32-year-old Lee did not show up for work. So on June 25th, 1982, her work calls the hotel to say, hey, can you check on, you know, my employee because she's not here? And it's unusual. So the Best Western employees go to her room, and inside the room they find an absolute tragedy. 32-year-old Lee Rotatori was dead. She was found lying on one of the beds. There wasn't much of a disturbance elsewhere in the hotel room. Lee herself was sexually assaulted and stabbed one time directly into her chest, and that was what killed her. And unfortunately, her case went cold pretty quickly because there were no witnesses. This is in 1982, before a lot of the investigative technology was really around. They had fingerprints and stuff, but this is also a hotel room. They did have DNA from the rape kit they did, but back in 1982, there wasn't anything they could do with it. Her husband, Jerry, was considered a suspect from the get-go because of his past, and also he is the husband. But they were able to determine very quickly that he was still in their home in Michigan with their child. And so they ruled him out completely. And then Lee's murder case just went cold and stayed cold for decades. In 2022, police announced they actually have their suspect. The suspect was a man named Thomas Freeman, and they got his name from doing those genealogy DNA things on like Ancestry.com and whatnot. But here's the kicker. He'll never go to trial for killing Lee because he himself was murdered. His decomposing body was actually found on October 30th, 1982, and they believe that he was actually murdered in July of 1982. And this was just, a few months after he murdered Lee. He had been shot to death and then just thrown into a shallow grave. There is some belief that possibly his murder and Lee's murder are somehow connected. I just don't know in which way. But police were able to get DNA from a family member of his, which would confirm with 100% certainty that he was Lee's killer. He'll just never have to face justice for it. It's of note that his murder has remained unsolved ever since. Quite honestly, who cares? Lee will never get the justice she deserves. But at least her murderer was not around long enough to commit any more murders. And in some way, that is kind of a form of justice. I'm just going to come out and say it, all right? Loud and proud, and I don't care. I could have lived my life without a single Lost Loves segment on Unsolved Mysteries. Because snooze fest, boring. Am I right or am I right or am I right or am I wrong or am I right? I don't want to watch an episode of Unsolved Mysteries and feel warm and fuzzy inside. I don't want joy and happiness when Robert Stack is talking. I mean, he did still manage to make those segments sound kind of creepy because of his voice, but still. Happiness, joy, no. Yuck. Yucky poo-poops. I want to watch Unsolved Mysteries and think that there is a serial killer down the hallway of my home. I want to see a shadow in my house and think it's a demon, because Robert Stack is talking about it on the television set. I want to see those creepy composite drawings of an uncaught murderer, thinking, oh my god, I just saw that man outside of my house 5 seconds ago. He's going to kill me. But with Lost Love segments, which they always fucking threw right in the middle of the goddamn episode, it just took the steam, took the air right out of everything. And I made a fist, and I wanted to punch myself. Anyway. Stop it. And stopped it. Don't do that shit anymore. Even though your dad in the show is not on anymore. But you know what I mean. Ooh, I found my lost family member from like 50 years ago. Great, whoopee. Good for you. I haven't seen my birth mother in my entire life, and now I have. I'm happy for you. Really. I know it's not showing happy in this thing, but my question always is in those segments, okay, but when does the murder start? When does a ghost become involved in this lost love story? I'm waiting, but I'm not getting. Okay, anyway, anyone else? His body is out there somewhere, but the odds are is that he will never be found. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Marek Kosciukiewicz. Viewer discretion is advised. So this case occurred in Katy, Texas. That is where 36-year-old Marek Kosciukiewicz, I'm hoping I said his last name right, that is where he lived with his wife, Alicia. Now, they were originally in the Calgary area in Canada, but they would move in 1995 down to Katy, Texas. Marek's wife, Alicia, had met this man here, Gary Wilson, at college. He was 29 years old when this case occurred. Now, he believed he was actually having some kind of affair with Alicia, but Alicia would say, no, it was a platonic friendship we had. Now, Marek and Alicia would eventually have 2 children. And unbeknownst to them, after they moved to Katy, Texas, where Gary Wilson actually helped them move, unbeknownst to them, Gary Wilson got himself his own apartment there in Katy, Texas, right down the road from Marek and Alicia. In June of 1996, Alicia and the children would actually go to Poland to visit family, and Marek would stay behind in Texas, and she would never see him alive again. On June 15th, 1996, that would be the last time anyone can actually recall ever seeing Marek again, because he just sort of poofed into thin air. 6 days later, Gary Wilson also disappears. Now, his vehicle is actually found back in Calgary, Canada, which coincided with the last day anyone can recall seeing him. When Marek is reported missing, police wanted to question Gary, but they couldn't find him. Then a friend of Gary Wilson's goes into a police station in Calgary, and this friend would hand a letter to a police officer, and this letter was reportedly from Gary. In the letter, Gary admits to killing Marek, but he said he did so out of self-defense. He claims that he went to the house to confront Marek about the paternity of Alicia's second child. I'm guessing he was maybe assuming it might have been his kid. He then says Marek leaves the room and comes back in the room with a hammer and attacks him with it. He then says he wrestles the hammer out of his hands and is able to strike Marek over his head with the hammer. He then took a hanger and he strangled Marek until he was dead. Then he said in the letter that he dismembered Marek's body and dumped him around these bushy areas in Oklahoma. When police go to the area where he said the body would have been, found, there was nothing found. It would have been in pieces, according to the letter. Gary said he did it that way to make it look like Marek had picked up and abandoned his family. When police gain entry to Marek and Alicia's home in Texas, they do find blood inside the house that comes back to being Marek's blood. But like I said, they never found his body at that point. They charge Gary Wilson with the murder. However, they don't know where he is. He fled. But in May of 1997, I guess he just couldn't take it anymore, and he walks into a Calgary police station to turn himself in. 3 years go by, and he is finally extradited back to Texas to stand trial for the murder of Marek. Now, the friend who turned in the letter to police about this confession of Marek's murder, that friend, for some reason, refused to testify at trial. And Gary Wilson continued his claim of self-defense. He would say that Marek was abusive towards Alicia. I don't know if that's ever actually been confirmed or not. But keep in mind, Gary moved right by them without their knowledge. That's borderline stalkerish. He then thinks he's in an actual romantic relationship with Alicia, and he thinks that the second child may be his. There's a lot of motive there, but they're not able to really prove that he planned the murder of Marek. So Gary Wilson ends up getting convicted of the murder, and he is sentenced to 20 years in prison. That happened in 2001. He is released in 2006 on parole, and he now lives a free man. But the body of Marek, never been found. And if he was truly dismembered and just sort of dumped along these bushes in Oklahoma, odds are they're never going to find him. And quite honestly, he didn't really get solid justice either. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Marissa Dalrymple. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in 1996 in Clearwater, Florida. Unfortunately, I do not have any photos of the victim. There is virtually nothing published about this case. This was 18-year-old Chris Roberts. He was the, I guess, boyfriend of Marissa. In September of 1996, he would enter Marissa's home, and he allegedly had a conversation with Marissa. Then he left, at least as that's what Marissa probably thought. Some sort of argument must have taken place, because then he walks back up to the bathtub where Marissa now is. He is now armed with a rifle. He points it right at her head and pulls the trigger, shooting her once in the head, killing her. Marissa had two brothers. One of them was 18 years old and still living in the house. Now, at the time this occurred, he did not hear anything because he was listening to music or probably had headphones on, and he didn't hear the shot. But eventually he would discover his sister dead in the bathtub. He didn't even know that Chris Roberts had been in the house. And so once Clearwater, Florida police got involved in this, they were having to figure out who on earth would do this to a 16-year-old kid. But then Chris Roberts, instead of going to police, goes to a school counselor. And he admitted to the counselor that he had shot and killed his girlfriend, Marissa. Chris Roberts was kind of known almost like a bully around school, and at the same time, he was also considered a really good student in terms of, like, he got good grades. But he never struck a chord in anyone that would be like, oh, this guy's gonna murder someone. When police find out about this, they search the car he was driving. They find the rifle just right there in the open in his car. It was a .22 caliber. They took the gun and they matched the bullets found with Marissa. It was a match. So they had his confession. They also have the murder weapon in his vehicle. Marissa's parents weren't exactly fond of this relationship, but even people close to Marissa were like, we never expected this would ever happen. Well, it turns out that Chris was planning to do a murder-suicide. He was planning to put the gun on himself, but he chickened out. He didn't do it. And thank goodness he didn't, because he was then arrested and charged with first-degree murder. He went on trial, and he was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without parole. This is him now in one of the most recent inmate searches I can find on him. But thankfully, he will never be free again. He was shot just outside this school, and he still has no justice. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Matthew Lange. Viewer discretion is advised. Now, at the time of this case, Matthew Lange was 37 years old. He was divorced, and they did have a son together. And they were living in Naperville, Illinois. Matthew was actually a psychology professor here at Lewis University. He was a really beloved professor there. I don't know the custody situation going on between Matthew and his ex-wife, but it sounds like he was still very much active in his son's life. On January 27th, 2017, Matthew was actually picking his son up. His ex-wife had enrolled their son here at this school to do Polish classes. I guess they would rent space here at the Scullin Middle School. This case happened in 2017. Matthew and his wife had separated back in 2015. On that January 27, 2017 day, he was in the parking lot of the middle school. He was waiting for his son to come out, when all of a sudden, out of nowhere, someone walks up to his window, the driver's side window, and shoots him. The shooter then walks around the front of the car, goes to the passenger side, and fires more shots at him. And the police have essentially kind of labeled this almost like an assassination killing, or execution style. Like, this was deliberate towards Matthew. Unfortunately, there were either no cameras present or no cameras that were pointing in that direction. Obviously, nowadays, every building has cameras outside of it, but they can't cover every square inch. So I don't know the situation, whether or not they had them or not, but it wasn't captured. There were really no witnesses who saw this happen. And this is like the middle of the day, and then someone just boldly walks up to his car and shoots him. He would be pronounced dead at the scene. Was this some sort of execution-style murder, but for what? I don't know who they've looked into, who they've cleared. There doesn't seem a whole lot of updates with this. His parents are just still actively pursuing or trying to get justice for him. They would say that, their son's future was looking very, very bright, and that there really was no enemies in his life that anyone knew about. So why would anyone do this to him? Well, to this day, they are still looking for those answers. They are still looking for justice. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the murder of David Lange, please call 630-420-6666 or 630-420-6006. There is a $50,000 reward for any information that helps lead to capturing his killer. If you saw something or if you know something, you have got to say something. Even if you remain anonymous, his family deserves to know the truth. His son does not get to grow up with a father anymore. So if you know something, do the right thing. It took 50 years, but answers finally came. Hello, true crimeers. This is the case of Maureen Brubaker Farley. Viewer discretion is advised. Maureen Brubaker grew up in a big family. She was the eldest of 7 kids, and they grew up in Sioux City, Iowa. And because she was the oldest, Maureen basically became the built-in babysitter. And she absolutely loved her siblings. She was a great older sister. By 1971, Maureen would marry a man named David Farley. But by the time this case occurs, David Farley has found himself incarcerated, and Maureen would move to Cedar Rapids to be closer to her husband. Maureen would take on a job at a local diner where everyone described her as really funny, very energetic. She was really outgoing, and she made friends really easy. And then one day, she didn't show up to work. On September 17th, 1971, Maureen failed to show up to work, and that was very much unlike her. If she wasn't going to show up, she would call, but she didn't. Some of her colleagues would go to check on her where she lived, but she didn't answer. And so after a few days, on September 20th, she is reported missing. Her family was notified, and they would begin searching for her. Police, volunteers, everyone started to search for Maureen. And 4 days after she was reported missing, she was found. She had been found underneath this bridge, and I guess this was near a landfill. These 2 young boys were over there playing when they found this abandoned car. When they looked at the car, they noticed the trunk was still open, and they opened the trunk, and they found a body. It was a body of a female, and so they rushed to call police. Cedar Rapids police becomes involved, and eventually they can confirm that this body, it was the missing 17-year-old Maureen Brubaker Farley. Maureen suffered from multiple blunt force trauma injuries to her head. The coroner would determine that Maureen was not killed instantly, that she was likely alive but unconscious for at least a couple of days. And then she finally died, probably alone in that trunk. And there was also evidence that she had been sexually assaulted. They search Maureen's, where she lives, and they don't see anything out of the ordinary. There's no forced entry into her apartment. There's no scene of a crime. Nothing rummaged through, nothing stolen. Police would uncover multiple, persons of interest and potential suspects, but they were able to rule all of them out. Her family had told police to talk to a man named George Smith. George had worked at the diner with Maureen. When they questioned George, he said he was working the time that she would have disappeared. But not knowing the exact time when she vanished, it's not exactly a solid alibi, but police also couldn't say for sure, oh, it's got to be this guy. They needed proof. They needed evidence. Decades go by and there's still no answers. But as those decades progress, Technology is also advancing, especially, as we all know, DNA technology. In 2006, they would go through all the pieces of evidence they still had, and they would test all of them for DNA. And they actually came across some things that had been untested that did contain DNA, which led to it being created as a male profile. But the DNA, once they put it into the database, it didn't match anyone at that time. So the suspects they had back, in the original investigation, most of them they would be able to get DNA from those people, even though it's been decades later. And they were able to confirm that all of the suspects and persons of interest, most of them, all were ruled out based on DNA. There was one person who they had not been able to locate. That was George Smith. They were never going to find DNA directly from George, however. George died in 2013. He died when he was 94 years old. So I've seen one photo that they're saying is George Smith, and it is a George Smith, but none of the news reports are showing his image, so I'm not going to show his image because I don't want to risk showing the wrong person. Every news clip I watch just says his name but never shows his picture. It's kind of weird, but at any rate, they didn't have him because he was dead. However, George did have children and grandchildren, and they were able to get a DNA sample from one of George's kids, his daughter. The DNA was a match. It was his DNA found on the evidence with Maureen's body. And so they hold a press conference. This is, the timing is pretty incredible. It was September 24th, 2021, exactly 50 years to the day when Maureen's body was found, that they would announce that they had their suspect, but he was deceased and justice will not come. Unfortunately, he got to live a very, very full life, but he is no longer able to hurt anyone ever again. You just kind of hope that there were no victims in between. It's not necessarily a knock towards the police department, though, because they were very limited on what they could do back then. They didn't have the technology nowadays that we have nowadays. So while he may have been a person of interest back then, they had no proof. At the very least, you can now say that this family's nightmare is gone, is over. They finally got the answers they were looking for. It may not be justice. The next best thing would be the answer. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Melissa Crabill. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Melissa Gail Crabill was 30 years old. She had a husband and a young child, both of whom she loved very much, and she would certainly never just pick up and leave them. But on April 1st, 1995, she vanished. Melissa was last seen at her family's house on that April 1st, 1995 day in Fort Worth, Texas. Apparently, she told her family that she was going to be meeting a friend. It doesn't sound like she said what friend, but that she would be home later on that day. But that never came. Melissa would be reported missing after not arriving back home and no one hearing from her. It's this very bizarre behavior, like she would never do that. A few weeks goes by, no sign of Melissa herself, but her car is found outside of a Remington hotel in Fort Worth, Texas. There were no signs of foul play within the car, no broken windows, there wasn't any blood or hair, fibers, nothing found that would indicate what may have happened to her. And this was before there was CCTV everywhere, and so there's no video footage of who left the car. Melissa has since never contacted her family, especially her husband. She hasn't sent birthday cards or anything to her baby. There's been nothing, zero contact. But she has to be somewhere. Something had to have happened to her. Most people believe that she did not vanish willingly, that something occurred that took her away from everyone. She is listed now as endangered and possible foul play. Melissa was described as having brown hair with hazel eyes. She may have had her hair dyed auburn at the time. Both of her ears are double pierced. Her maiden name is White, so she may go by Melissa White. She may use the full name Melissa Gail White Crabill. She was 5'4", approximately 130 pounds. And again, she was 30 years old at the time this occurred. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the whereabouts or what may have happened to Melissa Crabill, please call the Fort Worth Police Department at 817-282-6532. So this is one of the strangest DMs I've gotten recently. They said, "I know you are Daniel Reaves. You can't hide forever." What? That name sounded familiar, so I looked it up, and are you talking about this Daniel Reaves? I covered his case a while back. He's been missing since 2008. He vanished from Indiana. He was 25 years old at that time, so he is actually 2 years older than me. So again, I don't know what are you what? I don't even think I look like him. Is this what you're talking about? I'm really curious because I don't know. This case is straight out of a TV show or movie plot. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Nicholas Barclay. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Nicholas Barclay was 13 years old, and he and his family lived in San Antonio, Texas. Up to the point of this case, Nicholas did have some troubles. He had broken into a convenience store, he had stolen some things, he had threatened a teacher, and he was actually scheduled for a court hearing, I think because of the convenience store break-in. But he would never make it to that. On June 13th, 1993, Nicholas went to go play basketball with a friend of his. When he was done, he would call his house to see if his mom could come pick him up. His brother answered, and the brother said that, well, mom is sleeping, she works an overnight shift, so why don't you just go ahead and walk home? And that is apparently what Nicholas did. Nicholas never made it to his home. Nicholas has never been seen alive again. Or was he? But police did become involved pretty quickly. They searched all over for him, they questioned people, but they weren't getting anywhere. 3 months after his disappearance, his brother said that one day he thought he saw Nicholas trying to break into the garage of the home, but once Nicholas realized someone saw him, he took off. The brother swears it was definitely Nicholas. The police don't believe it was him. But no matter what, he still wasn't found. And then 3 years later, this story goes insane. There was a TV show called The Family several years ago, and its plot seemed very similar to this. So police receive a call from someone in Spain. They said that Nicholas Barclay was there, and he was in a youth center, a youth shelter. He claimed that Nicholas had been abducted and blindfolded and sent all the way to Spain, and that he was put into a child trafficking or sex trafficking ring. But Nicholas escaped, and he managed to get to authorities. This is apparently 16-year-old Nicholas Barclay. This is a 57-year-old man. How can anyone think that Anyway. This person right here claimed to be Nicholas Barclay. 3 years after his disappearance, again, he would be 16 years old. 1994, 1997. Right. At any rate, some of the family of Nicholas would fly to Spain to go pick up Nicholas. And the family member who went to pick him up said, oh, yeah, that is him. The interesting thing, though, is that he had brown eyes, and Nicholas had blue eyes. And the Nicholas in 1997 now has some sort of European accent. He said that was all because of his captivity. They experimented on him, which changed his eye color, and I guess somehow gave him an accent. He was trying to say that, I was being held captive for so long, I just sort of adapted the accent. At a certain point, a private investigator gets involved in this because this is obviously very strange and very suspicious. While some of the family identified this man as Nicholas, other people were like, there is no way that's him. And they were right. This man was a Frenchman named Frederic Bourdin. He was actually 23 years old. Still looks older than that, though. But this man is living now with the Barclay family, pretending to be Nicholas. This guy was a known impersonator, an imposter. Eventually, he would be nicknamed the man with 500 identities. And that's not even an exaggeration. He literally did this kind of thing like 500 times. Once he was caught for, lying, he was arrested and charged with various fraud charges and basically hindering the investigation into the missing child. He would end up being sentenced to 6 years in prison. This is a more recent photo of Frederick. I was watching an interview where he had talked about that, he had 500 identities and how he conned just so many people. It's like he enjoyed doing it, especially with Nicholas Barclay's family. This is a missing child. And he seemed kind of thrilled by it. It's just, ugh. And in the end, Nicholas Barclay is still missing. All that time between his discovery in Spain until the point where, Frederick was caught, they weren't really investigating anything, so that wasted a whole bunch of time. It sounds like at one point his mom was actually considered a suspect in his disappearance. She did take multiple polygraph tests. She passed 2 of them but failed 1. But those are not a reliable thing. There was also speculation his brother was involved in whatever happened to him. His brother died in 1998 from an overdose. But there are people who believe the family was directly involved in this, hence why when Frederick came to them and when they identified him as Nicholas, that could be explained as, well, we know it's not him, but hey, this takes the heat off of us, so we're just going to say it's him, That's just a theory, a possibility. But here at the end, Nicholas is still a missing person. He's never been seen again. If alive today, he would be in his 40s. Somebody somewhere out there has got to know the truth, the actual truth, about what happened to Nicholas Barclay. You can always report your information anonymously. You do not have to say who you are, you just have to say what you know. At the time of his disappearance, he had short, light brown hair, blue eyes. He had a tattoo of a letter J on his left shoulder, a letter T tattooed on his left hand, and the letters L and N tattooed on his outer left ankle. He has a gap between his 2 front teeth, and he does go by the name Nicky. And again, he was 13 years old at the time. If you have any information on the case of Nicholas Barclay, please call 210-207-7484. A loud pop, some broken glass, and a puff of smoke. Who was Ralph's assassin? Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Ralph Probst. Viewer discretion is advised. At the time of this case, Ralph Probst was 30 years old. He was a deputy for the Cook County Sheriff's Office in Illinois, and he was married to Marlene, and they had several children together. Ralph was actually a chemical engineer for some time, but he decided that he wanted to kind of move away from that. And so he ended up pursuing his career in law enforcement. On the night of April 10th, 1967, the Academy Awards were on. Ralph and Marlene sat down on the couch, as they did every year, to watch the ceremony. At some point, Marlene says she falls asleep on the couch, and then she is awoken to the sound of a loud pop, some broken glass, and then she sees a puff of smoke. The way that this was laid out was that this was their TV set, and the couch was obviously right across from it, but you can see directly into their kitchen. And then there was a puff of smoke that came from the window on this side. When she entered the kitchen, this is a recreation, she saw her husband Ralph lying on the ground with a pool of blood under his head. She calls 911, an ambulance arrives, but unfortunately they are unable to save Ralph. He was pronounced deceased at the scene. Marlene tells them the story of how she woke up and heard the sounds and the puff of smoke. They find that in the kitchen window there is a broken glass, which is where the bullet came from. It then passed through Ralph, ricocheted off of a cabinet, and then the bullet ended up on the stovetop. They determined that this gun came from an extremely rare .41 caliber weapon, a Magnum. At first, police were kind of suspicious of Marlene because they assumed, or they thought, that there would be no way, if the gunshot was fired from outside the house, that she would have seen a cloud of smoke inside. And so they actually tested it. Again, recreation. They fired from like 15, 20 feet away, and when they did so, there was no smoke seen in the house. But they tested it again at very close range to the window and pointed it to the direction where Ralph would have been standing when he was shot. And there was, lo and behold, a puff of smoke that entered the kitchen, visible from the couch. Marlene was telling the truth, and she was cleared as a suspect. Okay, but who else did this? Well, Ralph was a cop. One man that was a suspect was this man here, Sam DiStefano. He was a mobster there in Cook County. Well, at one point, Ralph Probst was assigned to him when Sam was in the hospital. When Ralph walked into his hospital room, he saw a bunch of visitors, and he was eating some really fancy food. Ralph kicks everyone out of the hospital room. They take away the fancy food and say, you can only eat the hospital food if you're going to be here. And then they handcuffed him to his bed, and this really, really pissed off Sam. Again, please be reminded, this guy is a fucking criminal, a mobster, a killer. etc. And so they thought that Sam DiStefano might have had a grudge against him. He embarrassed him in front of his friends, handcuffed him to a bed. He's this big, important mobster. They looked very heavily into Sam, and they could not find anything that actually connected him to Ralph's murder. And so eventually he was basically cleared. I don't think they determined that he was definitely innocent, that he maybe didn't hire someone to do it. They just never had any evidence or proof. And it could have been considered kind of a stretch to kill someone over that kind of thing. I don't have a photo of him, but they did also suspect a man named Frank Calvise. He had been a known criminal, and there were witness sightings who thought they saw Frank near the home where Ralph and Marlene lived. As a matter of fact, there was a house for sale across the street, and a man resembling this Frank person went to that open house and asked the realtor, "Is this the same layout as the house across the street?" Which was a very strange question. It sounded like he was trying to case out the joint to see where he could do this, where he could shoot Ralph in the house, but from outside. Ralph had actually visited Frank in the days leading up to his murder. But again, they were never able to establish any solid proof or any link that he was the one to kill Ralph. In the end, they have no actual solid evidence against anyone. They thought this would be a cut and dry case, that they would be able to solve this quickly. This happened in 1967. It is now April of 2025. And his case remains unsolved. That means it's about 58 years later, and if his killer was in their 20s or 30s, there is a good chance that they are dead. But there's also a good chance they could still be alive. There's no statute of limitations on murder, so if they catch some 80 or 90-year-old guy who's still alive, they can still arrest him and charge him and put him in jail. Someone somewhere out there might know the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the unsolved murder of Ralph Probst, please call 708-865-4700. She was supposed to be home by 10:30, but she never got there. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Rhonda Sue Coleman. Viewer discretion is advised. Rhonda Coleman lived in the Jeff Davis County area of Georgia. Rhonda was an only child who was born on January 18th, 1972, and she spent her entire life in Jeff Davis County. At the time this case occurred, she was a senior at Jeff Davis High School and working part-time as a cashier at the Piggly Wiggly. Rhonda was a tomboy at heart. She loved motorcycles, she loved being outside, she loved climbing trees, she loved playing in the dirt. I'm reading that she at one point did enroll in one beauty pageant, but decided that just was not for her because it interfered with her playtime. That's obviously when she was younger. Rhonda was popular, she was well loved, she had a very bubbly personality, she was great at making people smile. She had no enemies. Or did she? It was May 17th, 1990. Rhonda was just a couple of weeks away from graduating high school. And she was a part of a team who was, I guess, designing or making the big banner for the graduation, which was going to be done at somebody else's house. Now, normally her parents would say no, but because this was a big deal, it was for the graduation, they let her go. But they told her, you need to be home by 10:30 p.m. At 10 p.m., Rhonda's friends would take Rhonda to the gas station where Rhonda left her car, and they dropped her off there. They saw her get into her car and leave, and that was it. This is the gas station where she was dropped off at, and there was really no witnesses or anyone that said they saw something or anything unusual. All that, Rhonda got into her car and she took off. When Rhonda's father kind of woke up at 11:30 p.m., he realized that Rhonda still wasn't home. So he gets into his car and he begins to look for her. And as he's driving, he sees police lights kind of around this car that had been pulled off to the side of the road. He realized very quickly, that's his daughter's car. There were, I believe, 2 sets of footprints leading away from the vehicle. One they can confirm was Rhonda's size, and then somebody else's. And then down this dark road, you could see her footprints kind of disappearing off to the side of the road, and that's where they end. They searched this entire area for Rhonda. They could not find her. Just a few days later, though, on May 20th, Rhonda would be found. A hunter in a neighboring county called police to say he has found a badly burned human body, and this is the area where it was found. The coroner would soon identify the body as 18-year-old Rhonda Sue Coleman. She was still in the clothes that she was last seen in and they determined that she had been killed by strangulation. And they were able to detect that she had large amounts of gasoline on her head and also her hands. Those were the primary sources of where she was set on fire. Obviously, to try to get rid of any evidence of themselves on her, but also get rid of evidence that would help them easily identify her. But that didn't work. The first suspect they looked into was her ex-boyfriend named Greg. They had been separated for some time, but he was always a very controlling and kind of manipulative person, and that when they broke up, he did not take it well. He was not a fan of that. Greg was also someone who always had a can of gasoline in his car. So some people thought, well, that would make it easy for him to set her on fire then. He did, however, have an alibi that was confirmed by his mom. How accurate is that? I don't know, but he's never been arrested or anything. Another suspect was, I guess, someone who was a boyfriend to one of Rhonda's friends, and apparently Rhonda had been trying to tell this friend to break up with this boyfriend because this wasn't good news. And there was speculation that that boyfriend knew about that and did something to Rhonda. That guy had also been seen clearing, I guess he worked for some sort of timber or tree cutting business, and he had recently cleared some trees from the area where Rhonda was found. He also would typically carry a gas can in his car. But they could not build a case against him. They could not build a case against the ex-boyfriend. The way the car was found kind of made it sound like she was pulled over on the side of the road for someone, whether that be maybe someone posing as a cop or someone she knew. Maybe she pulled over because she saw someone else on the side of the road. Maybe she thought she could help. There's a whole bunch of possibilities here. And, I personally have talked about cases just like this, and almost all of the time, it's a random person. It's rarely like someone they know in a situation like this. But that doesn't mean it isn't someone she knew. And that's why we're at today. It's still a mystery. Nobody knows who killed Rhonda Sue Coleman. No one. Her murder has remained unsolved. It's been over 30 years now, and they are still asking for your help, the public's help, for any information that could help lead to capturing her killer. It was 30 plus years ago. Her killer will probably be in their mid-40s to mid-50s, depending on if it was like a fellow high school student or someone else. But there is a very, very good chance that that person is still alive out there. Maybe you know something, and if you do, you need to come forward. You can report information anonymously if you need to. So if you have any information on the murder of Rhonda Sue Coleman, please call 912-389-4103. There is currently a $35,000 reward for any information that helps lead to the capture of her killer. Has there ever been a murder in Antarctica? Well, this may be the one and only, but it is still unsolved. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Rodney Marks. Viewer discretion is advised. Rodney was born in March of 1968, and he was born in Australia. He would go on to attend the University of Melbourne, and then he eventually got his PhD from the University of New South Wales. He, at the time of this case, was an astrophysicist, an incredibly intelligent person, and his career would eventually take him to Antarctica, which brought him to the Amundsen Scott Station. It's also referred to as the Dome. It's like an underground station, which this was located at the South Pole. Now, Rodney had started his work there in 1997, and this case occurred in 2000. It was May 11th, 2000. Rodney came down with some sort of sickness. And for the next 36 hours, his illness seemed to be getting worse and worse. He would go to the station's doctor at least 3 times. But unfortunately, they were not able to diagnose whatever was wrong with him. And within a couple of days, 32-year-old Rodney Marks would die. The National Science Foundation would announce publicly that he died of natural causes. But what they didn't tell people at the time was that his death actually could not be explained. It was a mystery. And because of the remote location of this station and the fact that it was like in the middle of winter there, it became impossible to get Rodney to a proper, coroner. So they actually had to keep Rodney's body in a freezer for 6 months. And then after that 6 months had passed, they were able to finally transport his remains to New Zealand, where an autopsy would be conducted. And that's when the mystery comes in. Rodney had puncture wounds, like needle marks on his arms. However, they found not a single trace of any illegal substance in his body. And so what killed him? Well, methanol poisoning. He had ingested a large amount of methanol that eventually made him sick and then killed him. It was an excruciating couple of days for him. And then that's when speculation began. Did he do this to himself on purpose? He had an issue with alcohol in the past. However, when talking to literally everyone at the station, he was in really good spirits. And just based on his kind of behavior around the time he was sick, the base doctor, the coroner, and the people who worked there would basically all agree that there's just no way he did this to himself, because most people wouldn't do something that caused them such excruciating pain and discomfort for days on end. And he was really panicked. He was really concerned. Then they speculated, well, maybe he took it accidentally. Maybe he diluted some alcohol with methanol in order to, I guess, stretch out the alcohol. But then they found out that the base was really well stocked with alcohol. So he wouldn't need to have done that. Even more strange was that there was no actual full bottles of methanol there at the base. All they had in terms of methanol had been diluted into cleaning supplies. So the fact that there was no methanol just in its true form there makes this just way more strange. And so the coroner and people investigating this case, eventually they came to this theory or conclusion that he did not do it to himself. It's hard to believe that this was done accidentally. And so the only other likely option here is foul play. Someone poisoned Rodney, and there were about 49 people on that base, so there were 49 suspects. And there was jurisdictional issues up the wazoo when it came to this case. So the base that he was working on was an American base, but the land the base was on was controlled by New Zealand. The investigation was being led by a detective from New Zealand. And, they wanted to interview all 49 people at that base, but only 13 of them ever actually came in to be interviewed or agreed to. And so when New Zealand asked the United States, well, we need information on all of these people who work there. We need their records, their files. The U.S. would not aid, and they would not help. And then the United States decided to conduct their own investigation into this, but they would not share whatever findings they had with the New Zealand investigators. And nobody knows what the United States knows about this case. Nothing has ever come out publicly about their investigation. And so what we're left with is a bizarre mystery. It sounds like they have ruled out intentional suicide, and it sounds like they've ruled out the idea that this could be accidental. All they really know is that his manner of death was methanol poisoning. But what led to it? Well, they're still listing that as undetermined. There is very, very little information about the people, who are on the base with them. And if any side of the investigation, whether the United States or New Zealand, if they have suspects, they have not named them. But they also don't know if this was a murder. I was reading that Rodney's family, or at least his father, basically they don't really have much hope that this is ever going to be resolved. That because you have two, powerhouse kind of governments sort of going at each other, is there possibilities of cover-ups and whatnot? Well, his family doesn't believe that they're really ever going to get justice for him if justice needs to be served, and that answers will probably never come, leaving Rodney Marks as the one and only potential murderer at the South Pole, a mystery that will likely remain unsolved forever. He killed 5 people because he wanted to be famous. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Rosemar College of Beauty murders. Viewer discretion is advised. It was November 12th, 1966 in Mesa, Arizona, kind of in my neck of the woods. 18-year-old high school senior Robert Benjamin Smith would walk into the beauty salon in Mesa. He walked in, pointed his gun to the ceiling, and fired a shot to get everyone's attention. At that point, he ordered every single person who was in the building, including there was a couple children, to lie down face down in a circle in the back room. Robert then tried to take sandwich bags and wrap them over their heads to suffocate them, but that obviously did not work. He then takes his gun, points it at the back of their heads, and pulls the trigger, one by one. Joyce Sellers was killed instantly. Her young toddler, Deborah Sellers, was also shot in the head. However, she was not killed instantly. She, at that point, from what was described from the survivors, she got up and started to jump around in a panic because she was in horrible pain. And that's when Robert Benjamin Smith took a knife he had and began to stab the toddler until she was dead. Also shot and killed was Carol Farmer, Mary Margaret Olson, and Glenda Sue Carter. 4 adult women and 1 3-year-old child murdered. Joyce Sellers was also there with another one of her children. She tried to shield both of her kids from the gunshots, and she was able to save her other child, but, like I said earlier, Deborah did not survive. 2 other individuals were also shot. Bonita Sue Harris and Joyce Sellers' 3-month-old baby, Tamara Sellers. I'm not entirely sure how soon after he was arrested, but Robert Benjamin Smith was captured relatively quickly, and he was arrested without incident, and he admitted to what he did. He said he did it to make a name for himself. He wanted to become famous. He was actually inspired by a couple of other mass murderers. One, Charles Whitman, who was also known as the Texas Tower Sniper. And then he was also inspired by Richard Speck. I think all of these mass murders occurred within the same year or so. So he thought it would be cool to do the same thing. He was also an admirer of Adolf Hitler, Napoleon Bonaparte, Julius Caesar. He was also really inspired by the assassination of JFK. Basically had like this little man crush on Lee Harvey Oswald. He wanted to be like all of them. According to, family and doctors, he did have a significant issue with his mental health. Yeah, no shit. When he went on trial, he would say, again, I wanted to be known. I wanted people to know my name. And well, I guess you can say he kind of succeeded in that. He would end up being sentenced to death. But then, at a later time, the U.S. Supreme Court had declared a nationwide moratorium on the death penalty, so his sentence was then changed to life in prison without parole. And it came at the expense of 5 innocent victims. 2 more were shot and survived, all because he wanted to become famous. On April 21st, 2024, he died in prison. He got off the Greyhound bus, but would never be seen by her family ever again. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Rosie Grover. Viewer discretion is advised. So this case occurred in Ukiah in California. It was the early morning hours of July 19th, 1985. A Greyhound bus would pull into the station, which was near the Ukiah shopping center. Getting off that bus at that time was 15-year-old Rosie Marie Grover. He was coming home from a brief summer vacation while school was out to see relatives a little bit up north. This is that shopping center now, but this is where she got off back then. Now, there was some confusion, I guess, with her family. Sounds like some family was expecting her in the afternoon, and then there were other family members who thought that she was going to be arriving sometime later that morning. And because of the confusion, and because, cell phones didn't exist back then, no one was there to pick up Rosie. So this 15-year-old kid in this, pitch dark neighborhood holding a suitcase in her backpack, she doesn't know what to do. So she finds a payphone where she contacts the local sheriff's office. She says, hey, can you give me a ride to my home? And they're like, well, we can't do that. She then, I guess, was advised to call the California Highway Patrol to see if they could pick her up. But again, she was told, well, we can't do that. We're not an escort service, basically. This was a 15-year-old child who was telling them that she was afraid, because she was. But she starts walking towards her home. She never made it. Less than 2 hours after she arrived at that Greyhound station, her body was found on the side of a road. Rosie had been raped. She had been strangled. She had been stabbed. She had been bludgeoned. Then just left on the side of the road as if she were a piece of garbage. Speaking of piece of garbage, this is the man who found her. This is a more recent photo of him, but back when this case happened, he was 21. His name was Richard Dean Clark. He reported the body to police, but then he became the primary suspect literally within hours. And after some brief questioning, he confessed. He said he killed Rosie because he had raped her after abducting her, and that she screamed that she was going to call police and tell on him. And that's why he brutalized her. This innocent 15-year-old kid who was scared was, by all accounts, the happiest little girl you'd ever know. She loved school, loved being with her friends, she loved spending time with her family. She was intelligent. She had a very bright future ahead of her. Her life ended in one of the most brutal ways possible. Richard Dean Clark, after his confession, was arrested and charged with the murder. He would go on trial in 1987, where he was found guilty and he was sentenced to death. However, he is still on death row. California does not do executions at this time. Albeit behind bars, he's gotten to live his life. Rosie didn't. She didn't get to grow up because of him. Friends, her family never got a proper goodbye. This rocked the entire community. They had not really experienced anything this brutal before this. And it's just a sad shame that this man still gets to live when Rosie did not. They did install a nice little memorial bench at a local park under Rosie's name. Hopefully her name will live on forever, while his name will die into the night. Hopefully he dies in a prison cell, alone. He vanished into the night nearly 36 years ago. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Sergeant Michek. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred near South Bend, Indiana in 1989. That is where 22-year-old Sergeant Michek lived. He lived at a house on Fox Street, and on the night of May 4th, 1989, he would leave that house. He, along with a friend, at about 10 p.m., would leave the home, where they would then go to the corner of LaSalle Avenue and Niles Avenue to a little bar or pub called Captain Cork's. This is what it looks like now. I believe this is the same building here back then. At some point, Sergeant leaves the bar and then heads to another location on North Michigan Street. And I guess this was a place called the Bear's Den. This is what that area looks like today. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, Sergeant calls his home and wakes his mom and asks her for a ride home. Given the late hour, she said, "No, why don't you go ahead and call a cab?" He says, "Well, can't you just come pick me up?" And she says, "No, it's really late. Just call a cab." But then they hang up, and that's the last time she ever heard his voice. I don't think he ever actually called for a cab. Sergeant never got home, and no sign of him was ever seen ever again. And I don't really see a whole lot of information from then until now. I was reading that there are some rumors that he had been seen in a different state, that someone who looked like him got pulled over. Someone said you can find his body in a barrel in Mishawaka, Indiana, but that tip did not lead to anything. The haunting fact, though, is that he just vanished into the night, never to be seen again. What happened to him? Police have over the years asked for help. We need anything that you might know. The smallest detail could help uncover what happened. It does sound like police now believe that he met with foul play, that they are no longer looking for a living person, that if he is found, he will probably be deceased. And he met with foul play that very night. I can't imagine, because the mom, it was 3:30 in the morning. I mean, I understand, but I can't imagine, that has to, I saw in an article that in the decades since this disappearance, she has never changed her phone number. She has kept it the exact same number just in case Sergeant calls her, which is really heartbreaking because I'm sure as a mother, she has that, what if I did just get up and go pick him up? But, she couldn't possibly know that this is something that would have happened. In July of 2020, police did get a tip about some location nearby, and they had brought in some excavation stuff. They dug up a couple big holes, but they found nothing. And detectives there are now back at square one. I don't know what happened with his friend that he went to the first bar with, because it sounds like Sergeant left the first bar on his own and went to the other place. And I imagine they've talked to that friend, I'm sure. But someone somewhere out there has got to know the truth about what happened to Sergeant Michek on that night in 1989. Perhaps that someone is you. It's been over 30 years. It is time to say something if you know something. You can report your information anonymously. If you have information on the whereabouts of Sergeant Michek, please call 574-288-7867. This is one of the most horrifying worst deaths imaginable I have ever done. Viewer discretion is advised. This was 18-year-old Will Norton. A friend of his would describe him as one of the absolute most intelligent people, one of the nicest people you'd ever meet. He always gave respect to everyone, and he treated everyone equally. And he was also someone who loved to entertain. He actually had a YouTube channel, and unfortunately he had to experience one of the most terrifying ways to go. From what I understand, this is one of the last known photos of Will. This was at his high school graduation. He did not know that he was a short time away from dying. In 2011, the night of his graduation, in Joplin, Missouri, an F5 tornado would strike, which, an F5 is one of the largest and most terrifying tornadoes you could experience. And is this real? Because I was looking at photos, and they're claiming a photo of the Joplin tornado. This is horrifying. It apparently had a width of 1 mile, and it reached winds of somewhere around or over 200 miles per hour. After his high school graduation, he and his family would get into the family's vehicle. And this was all kind of coinciding with the time of when the tornado was starting. From what I understand, their vehicle had a sunroof. The force of the tornado, I think, ripped open that sunroof, and this is the car. But then it sucked Will Norton directly out of the car through the sunroof. The force was so strong, it pulled him physically out of the car. His father was holding on to his son's legs in hopes that he could help, bring him back in. But again, this is 200-mile-an-hour winds. It's an F5 tornado. It's one of the strongest you'll ever see. His father was unable to, pull him back in, understandably, because I don't think anyone could have. But, to experience being ripped out of a car through a sunroof, it's awful. It was him and his dad, from what I understand, in the car. And they were actually on the phone with Will's sister and mom. I guess they were elsewhere or in another car. And this happened while they're talking to them on the phone. The car would end up rolling multiple times and created this damage. Will's father would end up breaking his arm in this situation. But outside of that, he ended up being relatively okay, or at least alive. And the devastation from the tornado was so extreme that, trying to find where Will ended up was very difficult. It was about 5 or 6 days later when they finally found his remains in a pond. And, the entire city of Joplin was destroyed. There was about $2.8 billion worth of damage to Joplin. Over 1,100 people had injuries. And there were somewhere around 160 fatalities from the tornado. One of them, of course, being Will Norton. That just has to be an absolute, I can't even imagine. Living in Arizona, we don't have tornadoes or anything like that, so I don't even know what it's like. But, hopefully Will went quickly, and hopefully he did not suffer. She left work early, but she has never been seen since. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Tara Breckenridge. Viewer discretion is advised. Tara was born in California on September 30th, 1968, and she was the third of 5 total children in the family. So her family had at one point relocated to Del Rio, Texas, and then by the time this case happens, Tara herself is actually living in Houston. Tara was described as an always happy kind of person, very bubbly personality, was always smiling. She was incredibly caring and very respectful of others, just a loving, nurturing, and very uplifting person. She had dreams to become a photographer, but she was having a difficult time reaching that dream. And so she found herself working as a waitress at a place called the Men's Club. It was a topless bar or strip club. She started working there in 1989. In 1989, she met her boyfriend, Wayne Hecker, and he was never a fan of her working at the Men's Club. He did not like the idea of her working at a strip club, even though she did not strip. She was just a waitress there. But, he was possessive and just kind of like, I don't want you in that scenario with other men, So, obviously, it was not exactly a great relationship. Tara and Wayne were living together, and at first it seemed okay, but then their relationship just became very strained. Tara was more and more unhappy with the relationship. By July of 1992, she had visited her family in Del Rio. She kind of told them how, I don't think things are going so great right now with Wayne, but he wasn't abusive or anything like that, just very possessive, very jealous. It was the night of August 3rd, 1992. Tara was working her job at the Men's Club. It was a very slow night, and so the manager said, I can send a couple waitresses home. Tara actually volunteered to leave early, which everyone said that's very unusual because Tara never left early. She wanted to make sure she can get as much money as possible. And when she left the bar that night, the bouncer there, kind of gave her a goodbye, and she just walked right past him, which is also very unusual. Almost like she was in a hurry or was going to be meeting someone, but she never got to wherever she was intending to go. Now, Wayne got home to their apartment sometime around 5 a.m. and he said that she wasn't there. So he, along with a friend, began to drive around the area. And this is a recreation, but they claimed that along this busy freeway, they just saw Tara's car there on the side of the road. They found it sometime around 7 o'clock in the morning. The vehicle was locked, her keys were not there was no purse, and there was a can of mace just sitting on the passenger side seat. There was no broken windows, there was no sign of a struggle or foul play, no blood or anything. Her car was in working condition, and that's also kind of a mystery, so why was she even in this situation? So she's reported missing by her family. And the first person they look at is Wayne Hecker, the boyfriend. Now, Wayne says he was at a pool hall. during the time in question where she might have disappeared. So Tara punches out from work at 12:29 a.m. According to the people he was at the pool hall with, they said that Wayne left the pool hall sometime between 12 a.m. and 12:30 a.m. and he arrived back at the pool hall at 1:45 a.m. So you have the men's club here, Tara's car is found here, the pool hall where Wayne was at is there. Tara's car is found right in the middle. It's only like a few miles worth of driving. So they were very suspicious of Wayne. Where was he for that gap of time? That's an hour and 45 minutes worth of time where no one knows where he is. And why did he leave the pool hall for that weird time frame? But there has never been any evidence, physical evidence or anything to show that Wayne did anything to her. An hour and 45 minutes is a long time, but it's also not a long time, because that means he would have had to leave the pool hall, find Tara somewhere along the road as she's driving, stop her, they get into some kind of argument or something, he ends up killing her, hides her body, and then gets back to the pool hall. Can it be done? Yes. It's such a small window of time, though, at the same time. And when someone had asked him about her disappearance, he basically said, in terms of his involvement, he said, quote, he did not owe an explanation to anyone but the Lord, end quote. It's kind of weird. But there was also another potential suspect. There was a customer at the men's club that was there all the time and always basically asked for Tara. And they found notes that this man had written to Tara. They were like little love notes. One says, please don't be scared. Do what your heart tells you. I'm very excited that you'll marry me. Oh, he spelled marry wrong. He left her $100 tips frequently. Is it possible Wayne found these notes, got jealous, and killed her? Is it possible this guy, whoever he may be, he wanted Tara all for himself, and so he did something after she refused him? There's a lot of unknowns. And most importantly, Tara Breckenridge has never been found. She has not been seen ever again by anyone. She has not used any of her money. She has not used her social security number. You know, if it was Wayne, what could he have possibly done with her in terms of hiding her body in that short time frame? It would have almost had to have been pre-planned. Or he put her somewhere and then at a later date, you know, he moved her again. You know, I don't know. Wayne himself actually died in Houston, Texas in 2015, and he was never arrested, indicted, or charged with anything to do with whatever happened to Tara. And also, very tragically, both of her parents and 3 of her siblings have died in the interim. That's 5 people who died never knowing what happened to their loved one, their daughter, their sister. They never found her, they never brought her home, and so they died with never getting that. She does still have 1 sibling alive, to my knowledge, and so there is still someone out there who can get justice for her. Someone out there has got to know the truth about what happened to Tara Breckenridge, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the whereabouts or what may have happened to Tara Breckenridge, please call 713-222-8477. This is one of the most insane survival stories I have ever heard. Hello, true crimerers. Viewer discretion is advised. So this here is Timothy Lancaster. At the time this story occurred, he is 42 years old, he is a pilot, and at this point he had already logged over 11,000 flight hours. On June 10th, 1990, he would be involved in one of the craziest stories of survival I've ever heard. So his co-pilot, Alistair Aitchison, he had handled the takeoff. He then gave control of the plane over to Lancaster. They got to about 17,000 feet. Both of them started to remove their shoulder harnesses and their lap belts. All of a sudden, a flight attendant had opened the cockpit door, which was normal. When he did so, there was a loud bang that happened. The cabin had filled with condensation. Then the left windscreen panel on Lancaster's side of the flight deck had begun to separate from the fuselage. The Lancaster, who was no longer buckled in, was literally pulled by air out of the plane. He flew headfirst out of it. And this is from a reenactment. And so is this, by the way. That's not the real photo. As he flew out, his knees got caught on the flight control. So he was basically halfway in the plane, halfway out. You had someone basically grabbing onto his feet as the force of this is trying to pull him out. He is now exposed to very cold temperatures as well as extremely high wind. Autopilot then disengaged, which caused the plane to start descending. The flight deck door was then blown off of its hinges and it landed on the control panel, which then blocked the throttle control. So now the plane was actually going faster and it was going down. And you have the pilot literally hanging out of the plane. Now you've got all their papers, you've got debris flying out of the plane, blocking their sight. The co-pilot at this point was able to regain some control of the plane. He would then begin a very rapid emergency descent. He brought it down to a level that had sufficient air pressure. He's calling out basically an emergency call, but he can't hear the responses because the wind is so strong. Then the one person holding on to the captain began to tire out, and so someone had to grab the legs from him. Lancaster's head at this point is now banging rapidly against the outer portion of the plane, and they thought he was dead at this point, but they refused to let go of him, and thank goodness they did. They were able to unblock his knees or his legs from the part of the flight control he was stuck to. Then the co-pilot was finally able to make an emergency landing. The plane landed in Southampton. It had actually taken off from the Birmingham airport. And unbelievably, Timothy Lancaster survived. He was extremely injured. He was battered. He had frostbite. He was in shock. He was bruised all over. He had fractures to his right arm, his left thumb, and his right wrist. One of the people trying to hold on to him during this had dislocated his shoulder, but thankfully there were no other injuries, and unbelievably there were no fatalities. A terrifying story that ended in no tragedy. This is definitely one of the wildest survival stories I've ever told. He was last seen getting into a car that looks like this, but has never been seen since. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Timothy Pritting. Viewer discretion is advised. So this case occurred in Dunedin, which is in New Zealand. That is where 34-year-old mechanic Timothy Pritting lived. The last confirmed sighting of Timothy was on November 8th, 1994. Timothy left his vehicle and his beloved dog with a friend, and then he got into another person's vehicle, which was believed to be a Nissan Bluebird car. Very, very similar to this one. This was something that Timothy, did from time to time, it sounded like. He would go and frequent other places and leave his, dog with a friend. And so it wouldn't be until about a month when he was actually reported missing. According to police, Timothy was a low-level cannabis dealer. There was this potential that Timothy had left with maybe an associate of his to check out a cannabis plot in Trotter's Gorge, which is approximately 70 kilometers north of the city. Police were able to track down the individual that had picked Timothy up that November 8th day. And according to a documentary that was done on this, there were just inconsistencies in the driver's stories. The driver, I guess, was someone who had been known to police in the past. And according to other people, this individual had said at one point that Timothy had been instructed to dig his own grave. Police said there was one other potential sighting of Timothy, and it was near the Dunedin Botanical Gardens, but they haven't found Timothy there. They haven't found Timothy anywhere. It's possible that there was a drug angle to this. They have interviewed people, and they've been able to rule people out because, those people were in jail or in prison at the time he disappeared. There are other individuals who have since passed away, and it also, from what I understand, the police think that the driver who picked him up that day, may have been trying to tell other people to fabricate stories and witness sightings. However, they have not been able to arrest that individual because, one, there is no Timothy, they haven't found him, and two, there's no evidence of an actual crime scene. So, I know here in the States, it's very difficult to arrest or prosecute a case with, the lack of anything. I'm assuming it's probably the same in New Zealand. But at this point, it's 2025. This happened way back in 1994. It's been a little over 30 years, and you have probably moved on from those people that may have been involved in whatever happened to Timothy. And so now is the time to come forward to help give his family some kind of closure, answers, and hopefully even justice. Somebody somewhere out there knows the truth, and perhaps that someone is you. If you have any information on the whereabouts of Timothy Pritting, it says here that you are urged to contact police on 105. So if you know something, if you saw something, you have got to say something. Please come forward. The successful owner of this restaurant here would be murdered in his own home. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of T.K. Hardy. Viewer discretion is advised. This case occurred in Athens, Georgia, a popular college town. So this is a remodeled train station that was converted into one restaurant and then later a second one. The main one being T.K. Hardy's Saloon, and the other restaurant was called Somebody's Pizza. This was TK Hardy, and this was the owner of Somebody's Pizza. His name was John Mooney. John and TK did not get along whatsoever. They seemed to be at odds every single day. In this recreation, one day, John Mooney would come over to TK's restaurant and start handing out flyers to his patrons to come visit his restaurant. This created a large, loud argument in front of everyone. It pissed off TK. Now, eventually, the lease of the train station was up, and TK Hardy, pictured here, decided to purchase the entire thing. And then when he did that, he gave an eviction notice to John Mooney. John Mooney was none too pleased. Which takes us to August 30th, 1977. Just a few short days after the eviction notice was handed over, TK was shot dead in his home. What police would later learn is that the killer broke a window, broke into TK's home, cleaned up the glass so he wouldn't notice. He then hid in a closet and watched him as he moved around his house, TK. Now, the killer was also given a signal before TK got home. The signal was they were going to call TK's house and let it ring twice. That would mean that TK was on his way home. Well, the killer then watched TK go into his office. He then lifted his gun. TK never even saw it coming, and he fired one shot through his head, killing him instantly. 1 month later, this man comes into focus. His name is Elmo Florence. He goes into a restaurant and starts to basically boast that he was hired to kill TK because he had told people in the past he was willing to kill someone for money. John Mooney had hired him to kill TK. And the idiot making this confession to a bar owner, well, that was his undoing because that person went to the police immediately. And he told the story of what Elmo told him, and he gave at least 20 details that were spot on to the crime. Like, Elmo knew the exact layout of the house. He knew exactly where the bullet entered TK's head. He told things to this bar owner that nobody else should have known unless they were the killer. So he was arrested and charged with the murder. And then an arrest warrant was issued for John Mooney. He would be arrested, and he was also charged with murder. They found this note in John Mooney's home. It's something that John himself wrote. See Elmo, offer to him, if worst comes to worst, to take the whole rap and say robbery was the motive. We have agreement for me to take care of his wife and family. And this was in John's handwriting. Elmo Florence would be sentenced to life in prison without parole. John Mooney was also sentenced to life in prison, but it sounds like he was given the option for parole. Well, in 1980, about 19 months into his sentence, John Mooney escaped prison. It wouldn't be until 1989, almost a decade later, in Mesa, Arizona, in this house, John Mooney was recognized by someone who watched a re-airing of an episode of Unsolved Mysteries. And so John Mooney was found and he was arrested. He was then placed back into prison to continue his life sentence. In July of 2020, John Mooney was released on parole. Elmo Florence, who had been given a life sentence without parole, apparently that got changed because he was paroled out in 2007. He would later state that he was only there to scare TK to allowing John Mooney to sign a lease to get his restaurant back. But then he accidentally shot TK in an argument. But then in 2007, the reason why he was paroled was because he finally just admitted it again. He said he did not shoot him accidentally, he did it with intent. That was what he was there to do. He died at the age of 86 in 2017. So both of TK's murderers were let loose, allowed to live freely again. Must be nice because TK doesn't get to do that. Yeehaw, this cowboy might be a killer, but his identity remains unknown. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of the Valentine Sally. Viewer discretion is advised. It was Valentine's Day, February 14th, 1982, near Williams, Arizona. Along Interstate 40, underneath this cedar tree, the decomposing body of a young woman was discovered. The person really made no effort to actually hide the body. The body was that of a young girl, possibly in her late teens or early 20s. She was dressed in these exact blue jeans and had on this red and white sweater. This is the initial composite drawing that they made of her, and they nicknamed her Valentine Sally. The coroner would determine that Valentine Sally was killed likely 2 weeks prior to her discovery. Unfortunately, due to the high state of her decomposition, they were not able to determine her exact cause of death. However, he did speculate that it's possible she died of suffocation. Unfortunately, she had no ID with her, and when they put this image out on the news, no one recognized her. However, there would be witnesses who would come forward to state that they saw a young woman who might have looked like this, and this was sometime around February 2nd. The witnesses who saw this girl briefly spoke to her, and she told them that she was from Phoenix and that she was planning to go up to Flagstaff. 2 days later, someone else sees this young girl, and she was in the company of a much older cowboy, who the witnesses believed was a truck driver. So the witnesses sat down with the sketch artist, and this is the drawing they came up with. He honestly looks like a Mike Judge character. But the witness asked the young girl who was with him, do you feel safe? Are you comfortable with him? And she said yes. And then it is believed that the young girl was likely killed within hours of that last sighting. Apparently, the witness stated that the truck driver at one point crushed up an aspirin and rubbed it on a tooth that she was having a toothache with. And actually, that told police that this is a confirmed sighting of this murder victim. Because when she was found, they actually found crushed up aspirin on her tooth. And so she likely died very, very quickly after he put it on there. And he was the last person confirmed with her. They don't know, however, if that February 2nd sighting was of her, because this guy wasn't with her at that time. But she could have hitchhiked with him. Her true identity would not be revealed until 2021. They had come up with this more recent computerized image of the girl. However, they would end up using those genealogy sites like Ancestry.com and whatnot. And so they were able to link it to a certain family and the person who had the DNA on record was likely a cousin. They would end up working down the family tree, and the girl in question had frequently run away from home. On February 22nd, 2021, they announced who she was. She was 17-year-old Carolyn Eaton. Carolyn was actually originally from Bellefontaine Neighbors in Missouri. She was last seen around Christmas time when her family came home and saw her at the house with two unidentified men. The family got upset, and Carolyn ended up storming out of the house and leaving. And then they never saw or heard from her ever again, and it's believed she hitchhiked her way to Arizona. Did the family, were they even looking for her? I'm not sure. So now they know who she is, they just don't know who killed her. Well, they know it was likely this man. This is not exactly a great looking image, though, to be able to identify him. The odds are, since this was in the early 80s, he's probably dead or very, very old. But that doesn't mean you have to just give up, because at the very least, you get answers and possibly some potential justice. This young girl was killed. Someone murdered her, and then she seemed to be just completely forgotten about for decades. If you have any information that might help police identify her killer, please call 928-774-4523. He killed him because he thought no one would care. Hello, true crimerers. This is the case of Warren Barnes. Viewer discretion is advised. Warren Bruce Barnes was born on May 19th, 1951, and he lived in the Grand Valley area of Colorado his entire life. He has always been a very well-respected and loved member of the community. He loved being outdoors. He loved nature. He would spend hours at a time feeding birds. Now, by the time this case occurs, Warren Barnes is 69 years old, and he is homeless. The community would actually name him the Reading Man. This is an actual photo of Warren sitting in a chair behind a store. It was this bridal store, so it was somewhere back there. But he would just always sit there reading. And he was always so kind to everyone. He said hello to everyone. And honestly, everyone there, they loved him. They would give him books to read. They would give him food. And he really just minded his own business. And then one day, unfortunately, he crossed paths with a teenage psychopath. Brian Cohey Jr. was 19 years old when this case occurred. In his younger years, he had killed a cat, removed its head, and he kept the head for days. He was obsessed with Jeffrey Dahmer, so much so that his schoolmates would actually nickname him Dahmer. At 1:48 p.m. on March 1st, 2021, the parents of Brian Cohey would call police because they found a decomposing human body parts in their son's closet. It was a severed head and two hands. The remains would later be identified as 69-year-old Warren Barnes. Police approached Brian Cohey, and he just flatly admitted to doing it. He said, quote, "I've always wondered what murder felt like," end quote. He had seen Warren before reading on the side of the building, and his thought process was, well, if I kill a homeless man, nobody's going to care about him. He said he wanted to kill a homeless man or a prostitute because no one would bother to check or solve their case. Well, homeless people are also people. They're human beings. Brian told police that he was just driving around when he saw Warren. Brian then put on 3 layers of gloves, took out a knife, just walked right up to Warren as he was sleeping and stabbed him. And he kept stabbing him. And he said that Warren was screaming. He was screaming, "Why are you doing this? Why? Brian said he responded to Warren by growling, making animal noises. He then cut off his head and his hands and brought them to his house and stored them in bags. He then just cleaned himself off and went to sleep, like it was nothing." He actually compared himself to another serial killer named Edmund Kemper. I'm sure you all know him. He disposed of the rest of Warren's body parts in his car, and he drove that car into a nearby lake, which police were able to retrieve. Brian also says he took photos of the body after he stabbed him and took photos of the dismembered body. But then he admitted to deleting those photos because, well, he didn't want people to have the evidence. Well, luckily, the phone companies were able to retrieve those deleted photos. He was officially arrested and charged with murder. He tried to claim that he was insane, so he pled not guilty by reason of insanity. However, there were witnesses that went to the trial who testified, that, these were like psychologists and whatnot, that he knew exactly what he was doing. This was premeditated. Maybe not premeditated necessarily to kill Warren, but just to kill anyone. He also removed body parts and then disposed of them, which means he knew what he did was wrong and he needed to hide the evidence. Deleting photos also means he knew what he was doing was wrong. And the jury said, yeah, no, this guy's a psychopath. He was convicted and sentenced to life in prison. He also got an additional 13 years on top of that for evidence tampering. Meanwhile, Warren Barnes will be remembered forever. The community banded together to create this memorial for Warren. They made these books out of metal. They wanted to recreate the image that they saw every single day. A calm, sweet, quiet, old homeless man just reading books, minding his own business. And so, thankfully, Warren Barnes will be remembered forever.